Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the economy part of the skeleton key program. And hereby, in this third session of the economy aspect, I'll be talking about the monetary policy, monetary systems. And here, my flow would be like I'll be first discussing what the money is, how actually like money works in, what are different types of money, and then after that I'll be talking about various instruments of monetary policy that exist in India, which is like the most important part. Every year like at least two questions come from this aspect. And also I'll be talking about institutional mechanisms of monetary policy in India. And additionally I'll be covering uh, in a bit detail how does like actually monetary policy transmission functions not only in India but across the global e- economies. What role does money play in, and how, why, I mean, the study of money, the study of monetary policy or management of monetary policy is of highest importance when we deal with inflation, when we deal with development, when we deal with growth, when we deal with like some sectoral impetus to certain aspects of the economy and so on. First and foremost, you need to understand that uh, monetary system or the money actually like comes from the fact that it is a medium of exchange. So when like there must be a transaction that must be settled between the two parties, money is often used to actually like act as a medium to complete the obligations, to complete like the debt, to complete the final financial aspects of a particular transaction. जैसे ही कोई ट्रांजैक्शन हो रहा है दो पार्टीज के बीच में, तो उस केस में मनी जो है वो मीडियम की तरह काम कर सकता है. हमेशा जरूरी नहीं है कि वो कैश ही हो. बहुत सारे बार में वो गोल्ड भी हो सकता है, बहुत सारे बार में वो पेपर करेंसी भी हो सकती है, बहुत सारे बार में वो कोई डेप्ट इंस्ट्रूमेंट बॉन्ड्स भी हो सकते हैं. बट the main issue is they should be accepted to the both of the parties as a medium for exchange. The acceptance becomes the major player. And the currency is actually like the one form of the money, but it's not the only form of the money. There are other forms of money as well. Like ancient time there used to be animals. So what would happen, let's say you want to have 5 kgs of rice from someone, then you will say like take my goat and give me 5 kgs of rice. So animal was a way of currency. Similarly in the ancient like Greece and ancient Rome, the black paper used to be the currency. I mean, so if you can give someone certain quantities of black paper, that was accepted as a medium for completion of any transaction or any obligation. Similarly, there used to be coins which we actually studied a lot. Uh, it 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 must be focused on the fact that anything that is generally acceptable as a means for payment for settling of settling of the obligations. The obligation can be like the financial, they can be like the labor, they can be factor, anything, any obligation. They can be also of the debt. Any sort of such transactions, any sort of such obligation, when they are settled by a particular thing, then that thing becomes the money. And to tell you that economy cannot exist without money. It can be issued by a government, or it can be like administered, monitored by some other player, some centralizing authority. But there must be some medium for exchange to actually make the transaction happen. अब कोई तुम्हारे पास में ट्रांजैक्शन होना तो चाहिए ही ना, कि इफ लेट्स से यू आर अ पार्टी एंड तुम्हें किसी से कुछ लेना है या फिर किसी को कुछ देना है, वो सर्विसेस हो, गुड्स हो, सर्विसेस हो, जो भी हो, मतलब तो तुमको कुछ लेने के बदले कुछ देना भी तो पड़ेगा, तभी तो वो ट्रांजैक्शन रहेगा, तभी तो वो देगा. अगर वो फ्री में ही दे रहा है तो फिर ट्रांजैक्शन है ही नहीं. इट्स अ चैरिटी, it's a gift. Even for that the money is important. So the functions of money are, it acts as a medium of exchange, and most importantly it generalizes the purchasing power. And what I mean by generalized purchasing power, if let's say you have uh, uh, 5000 goats, So you don't know exactly from 5,000 goats how many kgs of rice you would get, how many kgs of wheat you would get, how many kgs of milk you would get. अब वो how the parties are there, then you will be like dealing with them on the individual basis, and then you will come up with अच्छा चलो अब इसको गोट देना है तो फिर इससे 5 लीटर राइस ले, या फिर इससे 3 लीटर 5 किलो राइस ले, या फिर 3 लीटर मिल्क ले. ऑल्सो लाइक 3 kg का गोट है या फिर 5 kg का गोट है, वी डोंट नो, आई मीन. But if let's say you would have rupees 1 lakh, so you would know that you would have 1 lakh, and with the 1 lakh rupees you may be getting like the 50 rupees 50 liter milk ले लो, या फिर rupees 60 राइस ले लो, जो भी लेना है वो ले लो, but you take this from this thing. uh, and it acts as a medium for exchange also, by which like you can actually make the transactions happen. Also it becomes a common value or a basic accounting unit. If let's say uh, uh, there is you have a pen and you have a pencil, and like let's say I have a pencil, so for every 3 pencils I would be exchanging 1 pen. But however, I so you only want, if let's say 1 pencil, then how many pens you would have to exchange for the 1 pencil? It would be like 1/3 pencils, right? But however, how can you put in 1/3 pencils? So the accounting becomes very challenging in such cases. So value or goods and services are often expressed in terms of money. So what would happen that like you'll get, let's say pencil is for, I mean 5 rupees, and the pen is for the 15 rupees. Then you give someone pen, he or she will give you 15 rupees. Then out of those 15 you give him 5 rupees, take a pencil, and then you are good to go. Also it serves as a standard for settlement of future payments and obligation. Let's say if you cannot like give a particular commodity at a particular point, but you want to settle it in the future, how can you settle it in the future? What may happen that if let's say there is a rice, there's a wheat, there is a goat, there's a commodity, there's a risk that it may get rotten, it may get uh, uh, foul, it may get like degraded. But with the money, the crucial value of money is it is actually like accepted and it can be stored. So the storage as a wealth and storage as a money actually acts as a way to make the deferred payment. Additionally, one more important thing with respect to money is it holds value. Generally it holds value. I mean, if let's say there is a inflation and all, there is a case that like it its value may get degraded, but it's commonly accepted as a value. And since if it's acceptable money, if it's an acceptable medium of exchange, if it's a high money, if it's a good money, then it holds value. So ऐसा नहीं रहेगा कि अगर आज मैंने लेट्स से रुपीज 5 लेट्स और 50 मेरी करेंसी, मतलब 50 निखिल करेंसी आपने खरीद ली, आपके पास है, तो फिर it will only act as a good medium of exchange, good money, if it holds its value. Tomorrow भी इसकी value 50 ही रहेगी. 50 in terms of what? 50 in terms of let's say dollar, 50 in terms of let's say dollar. So if let's say it doesn't hold value, then what is the use of that money? Why? Because it cannot be accepted for the deferred payment, it cannot be stored for wealth, it cannot be done for anything. So this holding value itself becomes a very important preposition when we consider or when we look into the use of money in the form of cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies, their value fluctuates greatly. Its value like किसी दिन let's say like $60,000 रहेगा, फिर एकदम से $1 lakh रहेगा. So if let's say someone has an obligation to actually have the deferred payment, then on what basis, on what rate it would actually like be expressed in terms of it. And also if it if its value is getting stored, getting like degraded very quickly, very like unreliably, then how can it become the storer of wealth? ऐसा रहेगा कि फिर अब कल को तुम बिल्कुल करोड़पति हो, फिर एकदम से बिटकॉइन गिरा और फिर तुम्हारी कोई मतलब बस अब है ही नहीं कुछ. तो that's why like the economists and even like the myself who is a very layman actually is bit hesitant about having assets as a form of medium of exchange. Bitcoin can be asset, but Bitcoin cannot be a medium for exchange. Bitcoin cannot be a money. I hope like you are getting my point. uh, Another thing that I want you to understand is why does this concept of money actually emerge. मतलब अब सब कुछ हो तो रहा है कि you are producing, you are exchanging money for it. तुम you give someone your goats and take someone's milk, take someone's rice and so on. But however, in that case, you actually need to have double coincidence of wants. What do I mean? If let's say you have only goats and if let's say someone has rice, so transaction could only happen if though the one who actually has rice wants goats and the one who has goats actually wants rice. So only if there is a double coincidence of wants, the want for rice and want for uh, uh, the goat must actually come in place at a single place. But अब let's say किसी को निविया का मॉइस्चराइजर चाहिए, किसी को डॉट एंड की का चाहिए, किसी को क्या है तुम्हारा निविया का चाहिए, डॉट एंड की का चाहिए, किसी को पॉन्ड्स का चाहिए, किसी को नाइकी का चाहिए, जो भी है, मतलब जो भी तुम्हारे ब्रांड्स रहते हैं मेरे को नहीं पता, पर आई होप लाइक यू आर गेटिंग माय पॉइंट. या फिर किसी को नाइकी का जूता चाहिए, किसी को एडिडास का जूता चाहिए, किसी को स्केचर्स का चाहिए. अब even in that, even a single commodity, if we have so much of variety, how can there be a double coincidence of want? The issue of double coincidence of wants arises most, and then in that case the role of money as a medium for transaction, as a medium for exchange, becomes the most important and most crucial. Secondly, the valuation. How would, like I have discussed, what sort of, like if let's say there is a छोटा goat and then there is a बड़ा goat, तो बड़े गोट के लिए 3 kg देना है या फिर बड़े गोट के लिए 3.5 kg राइस देना है या फिर इसके लिए 4 kg देना है फिर इसका 4.5 kg देना है, तो फिर हाउ वुड दैट बी डिसाइडेड? वी डोंट नो एक्चुअली लाइक द वैल्यूएशन फॉर इट. Like the carpenter, if he wishes to sell the chair, and then so sale is a transaction, but how much should be the value for the chair? And in form of chair, what he can get, like 5 kg राइस लेगा, 5 kg वीट लेगा या फिर 5 kg तुअर दाल लेगा, फिर उसमें भी you need to have double coincidence of what. So that's why like medium money as a medium of exchange becomes very important. While talking about money, there are many types of money. They are needed to be understood first. So firstly is like a full bodied money. What does full bodied money means? That the face value of the money is not in excess of the intrinsic value. So what happens, let's say I'm saying you that this is a rupees 10 coin. So 10 rupees is the face value of it, and without any backing, without anything, whatever that intrinsically this coin hold. So if let's say this coin holds rupees 10 of steel, then this 10 rupees steel becomes its intrinsic value. Similar is the case with, let's say there is this note coin which is of rupees 20. So 20 rupees coin is itself made by rupees 10 steel, 10 rupees steel, but its face value is, but it's when it's exchanged for in the medium for a transaction, it will settle a debt for the 20 rupees. Let me tell you again, ये 20 रुपए का कॉइन है, इसमें जैसे 10 रुपए के कॉइन में 10 रुपए का स्टील लग रहा था, उसमें ही 20 रुपए के कॉइन में भी 10 रुपए का ही स्टील लग रहा है, बट इसकी फेस वैल्यू 20 रुपए है. क्यों? क्योंकि अगर मैं इसको किसी को देके कोई गुड्स लेना चाहूंगा, कोई डेट सेटल करना चाहूंगा, तो फिर ये 20 रुपए की डेट सेटल करेगा, 20 रुपए के गुड्स देगा, 20 रुपए की सर्विस देगा मेरे को. पर बिना इस फेस के, इस पर 20 लिखे हुए बिना, इसका जो एक्चुअल इंट्रिंसिक वैल्यू है वो 10 ही है. सो व्हाट डज फुल बॉडीड money mean? It's money where more or is equivalent, is more or less equivalent to as to the value of commodity. So like the gold coins, gold coin जितने उस पे कुछ भी लिखा हुआ हो, गोल्ड की वैल्यू जितनी है उतनी ही वो होल्ड करेगा. सो वैल्यू ऑफ मनी इज इक्वल टू वैल्यू ऑफ कमोडिटी. ऑन द कॉन्ट्ररी ऑफ दिस, देयर आर टोकन मनीज, देयर आर पेपर मनीज, देयर आर क्रेडिट मनी, whereby the value of the money is actually like face value is way more than that of the commodity, and it's accepted on the basis of creditworthiness of government. So if let's say there is this 50 rupees note, rupees 50 नोट, अब नोट बनाने में खर्चा कितना ही लगेगा? अब समझ लो कि ये 5 रुपए का पेपर है, कुछ 2 रुपए का कुछ है, और फिर टोटल मिलाकर के इसको 10 रुपए का लगा. तो ये 10 रुपए का जो इसका जो सामान है, आई एम नॉट सेइंग द खर्चा, बट ये 10 रुपए का पेपर है, 10 रुपए का इसको, ये जो इंटरेंसिक वैल्यू उसका 10 रुपए है, बट ये नोट 50 का भी बन सकता है, ये नोट 500 का भी बन सकता है. तो व्हाट इट इज, इट्स अ टोकन मनी. उसकी इंट्रिंसिक इनहेरेंट वैल्यू बहुत नहीं है, कुछ भी नहीं है, but just because like there is some authority, there is some backing, there is some guarantee which lies behind it, it becomes a token money. Then there is a representative full bodied money. मतलब क्या है कि अब let's say कि type of token money की जिसके पीछे कुछ backing है, equivalent amount of gold and bullion by the issuing authority. अब कैसे, if let's say I am an RBI and I am getting the token currency of let's say 200 crore, तो whenever like I print 200 crore के note, I buy rupees 200 crore का gold with me. What that will do, if let's say someone who is a Sam is a US citizen, Sam does not believe in Indian government. What does Sam do? Sam gets 1 lakh rupees from someone and Sam says that I don't believe in your money. What I want is I want its value. Sam goes to the RBI. What does RBI would do? RBI इसमें से 1 लाख रुपए को गोल्ड लेगा, उसको दे देगा. This representative full bodied money means that there is a like backing for it, and only government has that value of gold and silver which is issuing. And generally matlab earlier used to be like this representative full bodied money system, but अब ऐसा नहीं है, अब तो पूरा ही पूरा token paper money चलता है. Then there is a convertible money. So in this case the Sam was having the convertible money. Then there is a non-convertible money. What does it mean? That it cannot be converted to gold and silver. These are not important. Only these three terms are important. Additionally, there is a Gresham's law which actually becomes very significant. So when like there are both are legal monies, both are token monies, both are legal tenders. Let me first discuss what's fiat money and what's legal tender money. So fiat money is that part of money which is like it's a type of money which is actually which is actually like accepted on the basis of trust in the issuing authority, and also like it serves as a on the basis of fiat, like which is a trust and on the basis of order of the government. On the contrary, legal tender money is also like the money, but it's a status. So fiat money is a type of money, but legal tender is a status of a money. So fiat money becomes the legal tender when there is a legal compulsion or legal obligation of its use for the settling of debt. Let me explain it one more time. Fiat money is that money which is actually like formed, printed, or is in circulation on the basis of trust that people have in the issuing authority. It is issued by the order of the authority or the government. It becomes a legal tender when the fiat money cannot be rejected for settling of the debt or settling of the obligation. There is a law for it, there is a mandate for it to accept that money. अगर आपके पास में कोई एक फिएट मनी है जो गवर्नमेंट ने इशू करा है और आपने ये उसलिए लिया क्योंकि आपका उस गवर्नमेंट पे ट्रस्ट है, तो जरूरी नहीं है कि हमेशा ही वो लीगल टेंडर है. व्हाई? बिकॉज व्हाट हैपेंस दैट इफ लेट्स से you do have a dollar can be a fiat money in India. Why? Because yes, you do have a trust in US government and you do know that गवर्नमेंट ऑफ यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स ऑफ अमेरिका वुडंट लाइक मतलब कुछ डूबेगा नहीं, वो हमेशा ही तुम्हारे पास में जो $100 का ऑब्लिगेशन है वो करेगा ही करेगा. पर इंडिया में वो लीगल टेंडर हो नहीं सकता क्योंकि उसके लिए लॉ नहीं है. इंडिया में लीगल टेंडर कौन सा है? जो गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया ने जो फिएट मनी प्रिंट करा, या फिर आई एम सॉरी, जो आरबीआई ने जो गवर्नमेंट जो फिएट मनी प्रिंट करा है वो आप लेने या फिर ना देने के लिए नकार नहीं सकते, पर आप डॉलर लेने या फिर देने के लिए आप नकार सकते हो. यू डोंट हैव एनी ऑब्लिगेशन टू यूज द डॉलर फॉर सेटलिंग ऑफ डेट. आई होप लाइक आई एम क्लियर विद दिस. Between the fiat money, though they are used synonymously, but fiat money becomes legal tender when there is a law for it and when there is a legal compulsion, legal obligation for its use to settle debts in the money transactions or like to settle obligations and so on. So Gresham's law, now let's get back to the Gresham's law. Gresham's law says that when both are legal tenders, it says that bad money drives out the good money from the circulation. What does it mean? That like let's say there are two currencies with different intrinsic values. Uh, uh, both are legal tenders, both are, or let's say, fiat monies. So what they will do, the low intrinsic value currency would be spent and high intrinsic value currency would be holded. इसका बहुत अच्छा एग्जांपल है पाकिस्तान या फिर श्रीलंका में. द as soon as there was economic crisis in Sri Lanka, what happened? People started spending Sri Lankan currency a lot more, and the value of Sri Lankan currency started gradually decreasing and a lot compared to what the dollar. I'm sorry, let me have the water, please. Yes. So I'm back. So what people were doing? People were spending low intrinsic value Sri Lankan dollar or Sri Lankan currency, and then they were holding the American dollar. So the like uh, uh, bad money was present in the circulation, and the high intrinsic value money was holded. Why? अब तुम यहां से मेरा ये वाला कंसेप्ट समझ सकते हो कि why the main function of money is it should hold value, it should store wealth, and it should act as a deferred payment. If the intrinsic value of the money is low, if the future expectation value of the intrinsic value of the money is low, then how can like people would store that money? The people would spend the low intrinsic value and then actually uh, put in their volts the high intrinsic value money or the good money. ठीक है. फिर उसके बाद में अब ये कुछ कुछ टर्म्स है वो देख लेना, देयर नॉट मच ऑफ इंटरेस्ट, बस कि तुमको पता हो कि भाई लिमिटेड लीगल टेंडर मनी क्या है, कि अप टू एक सर्टेन लिमिट तक आप ले सकते हो. अब जैसे वो बोलेगा कि अगर आपको 5,000 रुपया देना है तो फिर यू कैन ओनली गिव लाइक 50 रुपीज कॉइन, 50 रुपीज नोट टिल द 5,000 रुपए. 50 पैसा कॉइन अगर आपको 5 पैसे 50 पैसे की कॉइन से कोई ऑब्लिगेशन सेटल करना है, कोई डेट सेटल करनी है, तो फिर आप केवल मैक्सिमम 10 रुपीज तक का ही पेमेंट कर सकते हो. एंड सिमिलरली देयर इज अनलिमिटेड लीगल टेंडर मनी. भाई अब 500 रुपए का नोट है, पैसा ही पैसा है, कितना भी खर्च करो उसमें क्या मतलब है. एंड अगेन देयर इज अ नॉन लीगल टेंडर मनी, ऑप्शनल मनी, कि आपके पास कंपलसरी नहीं है, बिटकॉइन है, नेपालीज रुपी आपके पास में वो ही नहीं है. देन देयर इज अ फिड्यूशियरी मनी. Fiduciary money is served as a money on the basis of a uh, uh, trust in the authority which is like the giving it. So generally what happens, like the legal tender or the fiat money is actually given by someone uh, who is a sovereign authority or whether they are governments. But fiduciary money is something like which are given by someone whom people have the trust in, whom the people have belief in, they are the authority. जैसे बात करें कि let's say I run let's say called as currency called as NFU. So what we will do, we have like one NFU, two NFU, three NFU as notes, and everyone like our aspirants, our community believes in our trust and they believe in NFU like you all do. So what you will do, you will use one NFU, two NFU to settle your debts, to settle your chai bills, to settle your like sutta bills, to settle your Maggie bills, to settle your sandwich bills, pizza bills, whatever they are. What you will do is like you use NFU because you feel that like you have trust in us. I hope like you got the point. Then there is another one thing which is very important, which is the plastic money. So it refers to the debit cards and credit cards. So what happens? Let's say I have a Amex credit card and I have a credit limit of rupees 18 lakhs over there. Do I have a 18 lakhs with me? Having 18 lakhs means that I have purchasing power of 18 lakhs. Whether like I have to pay them or not, that does not matter. I mean, that's another ball game. But having 18 lakh rupees as a purchasing power means that I have a money of, let's say, like the 18 lakhs. And that actually is a plastic money. Do I have it in cash? Do I have it in bank? Do I have it in, let's say, assets? No, that's not the case. I have it in my credit card or in my debit card, whatever may be the case, that's called as a plastic money. Just only you need to know these things. Before moving forward, you need to know like certain things, because to understand how does like the monetary supply and monetary aggregate works in, you need to know few terms. Firstly, if let's say you have a bank, then in that bank, in the balance sheets of the bank, the deposits someone put in are actually bank's liabilities. So there is this Shruti. What the Shruti does, Shruti has 1,000 rupees with her, and then she goes to bank and she deposits that money in the bank and gets a slip of deposit. So this 100 rupee becomes a liability for the bank. However, what happens, like let's say me Nikhil, I want to buy a Thar. What do? I go to the bank. I ask banks. Let's say I want rupees 20 lakh loans. Bank sees Nikhil is a good guy. Nikhil has a good CIBIL, and banks gives me rupees 20 lakh loan. So though for me it's a debt, for me it's a liability. I need to pay that regularly at uh, timely payment cycle. But for bank it's a asset. Why? Because bank will generate certain income from it, the interest income. So though bank is lending me 20 lakh rupees, bank will get from me 24 lakh rupees over the period of 7 years or 4 5 years. I hope like this concept is absolutely clear for you, because if this concept isn't clear, then I think everything for the future becomes very difficult. You must know this thing. I hope like this is clear. What are assets and what are deposits, what are liabilities for the bank. Additionally, there are types of bank accounts. First are like the savings account, which generally like you, me, my father, your sister, your girlfriend, they all hold. They are like the savings account, and they are generally with the household, and there are certain restrictions on it. Abhi kaisa hai ki, let's say if you want to deposit cash, you can only deposit rupees 2 lakh rupees without any charges, and then after that like rupees 10 lakh rupees uh, overall in your bank account. Also, like there are certain withdrawal limits. You can only withdraw rupees 1 lakh rupees a day. इफ लेट से तुम्हें कल को शादी करनी या फिर भाग के जाना है और ज्वेलरी बनानी है, रुपीज 50 लाख रुपीज चाहिए, तो देर आर सर्टन रेस्ट्रिक्शंस, यू कैन नॉट डू इट. Another thing is that you, when you deposit money in your account, you do get interest. uh, and what used to happen, the interest rate for the money that you deposit in the saving account, earlier they were mandated by RBI, but now they are left to individual banks. Up to them, it should decide like कितना पैसा तुमको देना है, एंड डिपेंडिंग अपॉन लाइक उनकी बैलेंस शीट कैसी है, उनको कितना अग्रेसिवली कस्टमर में पुश करना है, उनका मार्जिनल कॉस्ट ऑफ लेंडिंग कितना है. सो व्हाट्स दैट मार्जिनल कॉस्ट ऑफ लेंडिंग रेट, मार्जिनल कॉस्ट ऑफ लेंडिंग कितना है उनका, उस हिसाब से दे विल पुट अ they will give you savings interest. Then there is a current account which is used by business. They are like majorly for the uh, settling of transaction for like business activities and so on. इनमें इंटरेस्ट ऑलमोस्ट जीरो रहता है, बट इसमें डिपॉजिट और विड्रॉल पे कोई रेस्ट्रिक्शन नहीं रहता. सो दीज आर लाइक द डिमांड लाइबिलिटीज. But then there are also some time liabilities, which are like the recurring deposits and fixed deposits. So fixed deposit में कैसा है कि you cannot go in someday and say कि मेरे को fixed deposit चाहिए. नहीं, there is a time to which कि ये deposit 5 साल बाद mature होगा, ये deposit 7 साल बाद mature होगा. So this time is actually like the time deposit, and they are like usually held by anyone, and they are of the high interest compared to the saving account. Why they are of the high interest? Because banks have a surety that you are not gonna ask for this deposit from me for like let's say next 5 years, so I can lend this money to some other person and earn income from it for the longer time. So this time deposit, this longer duration gives a bit of flexibility, gives a bit of added advantage to the bank. That's why the interest rates are higher in this context. And then I'm in this context, one thing becomes very important, which is like the CBDC. The question was also asked in I think 2023 and 2024 about this. So we have seen about like what's the fiat money, what's the token money, what's the legal tender and all. So there is a quite imperative to know what CBDC is. So in I think budget 2023 or 2024, they amended the section 2020 section 22 of the RBI Act 1934 to add digital currency as a part of definition of a money in India, and it was recommended on the basis of SC Garg committee. What it is, these are actual legal tenders, but only that they are not in the form of note, but they are in the form of your digital currency. So you will have a wallet, and like the wallet you have in your pocket, you will have a wallet in your mobile in a digital medium. And what they will have, they will show like, देखो मेरे पास में यहाँ पे 510 रुपीज है, तो 510 अभी किसी वॉलेट में नहीं है, किसी बैंक अकाउंट में नहीं, कहीं पे भी नहीं है. They are actually the digital notes that you have. Remember, they are not in bank account, they are not anywhere, I mean they are not with any private payment aggregator or anything. They are exactly the note in your CBDC wallet, and they are directly the liability of the RBI. They are like the sovereign and RBI liability. In case of bank accounts, so if let's say you would ask me that Paytm है, तो फिर Paytm में कैसे, पेटीएम में भी तो मेरे पास में पैसे है, तो फिर हाउ डज दैट डिफर्स फ्रॉम दी सीबीडीसी. पेटीएम में जो पेटीएम कैश या फिर स्विगी कैश है या फिर अमेजॉन पे कैश है, वॉट एवर दैट मनी इज, दैट मनी only is the liability of the Amazon to you, but CBDC is liability of the RBI or the sovereign government to you firstly. Secondly, you would say that sir मैं UPI से भी तो पैसे भेज सकता हूं, but the amount of transaction that you are doing from the UPI, they are done from bank falana bank to Bistana bank, I mean bank A to bank B. However, the CBDC transactions are done just like the our cash transaction. तुम मेरे को पैसे दो सर, ले लो, आप बहुत मेहनत करते हो, थार ले लो, तुम अपने CBDC से मेरे CBDC में भेज दो, हो गया, फिर अपना ट्रांजैक्शन रहा. देयर इज नो बैंक इंटरमीडियरी in it, no bank intermediary. So it's actually like a legal tender, and also it's a programmable. What does programmable mean? You can develop an algorithm behind it कि चलो भैया इतने इतने लोगों को इतने इस टाइम पे पैसा देना है, आप कोड लिखो और इस वॉलेट को बता दो, वॉलेट पैसा दे देगा. देन इट्स अ डिजिटल, नाम में ही डिजिटल है तो फिर डिजिटल तो रहेगा ही. एंड देयर इज अ ट्रेसेबिलिटी. हाउ द ट्रेसेबिलिटी इज लाइक, यू वुड नो from this account, this wallet, where did this note go, then where did this note go, and then where did this note go, you would actually know it. So there is a traceability for it. But however, like I told, there are no bank intermediaries in between it. Economists have argued that this may lead to the decrease in deposits that banks have, since people would prefer to have their money in the form of CBDC when they want it digital. And what that would mean that if let's say बैंक के पास में तुमने किया, तुम्हारे पास में CBDC है, यू से कि अब मैं CBDC में ही पैसे रखूंगा, आई डोंट वांट टू कीप दैट मनी इन द बैंक्स. सो amount of money, amount of deposits that bank would be getting, they actually get reduced. So with decrease in amount of deposits that bank getting, bank would have lesser money to lend. So if banks have lesser money to lend, what would bank do? Bank would only lend to those who have highest credit rating. So, and if let's say someone who has a lower credit rating, what they would have to do, they would have to borrow at a higher interest rate. So that's why this may increase the credit rate for in general. And then there, of course, due to traceability, there are issues of data and privacy. I hope like this covers all of it. Then there are like the demand liabilities, and then there are time liabilities with the bank. So time liabilities are like some portion of the time liability of the savings account, like you won't be getting it this time, but you will be getting that money in let's say 30 days, 60 days, or some other time. And then there are like the fixed deposit based time liabilities, and then there are current accounts and savings account where there are demand liabilities. You can go there and you can ask for your money anytime. And of course, there are post office savings accounts as well. Here the central government is the owner of it, and what they do is they generally don't use these funds for lending, but rather what they do is they actually use these funds for the developmental activities. If you would know that, like, there are certificates like the Kisan Vikas Patra. So government says that the proceeds, or they use this money for the development of agriculture and for the development of of farmers. uh, in post office, you generally open the savings account, you can open RDs and you can open FDs, but there aren't like current accounts prominent. Most important thing that you need to look forward is post office bank accounts are, they have limited liquidity. Why do I mean that? If you would be having a inexperience with it, they generally like take day or two. They generally have certain restrictions, like you can only withdraw so and so amount at this time. If let's say you have opened a national savings certificate like NSC, then if you close it in within 1 year, then you would be you would have to pay like 1%, 2% of the penalties and so on. I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but certain limitations existed. So compared to banks, compared to the formal banking system, the post office financial systems actually have lower liquidity. However, they are assumed to be of the higher security, of the higher trust. Why? Because the central government is the owner, and generally they don't lend the funds, so the credit risk associated with your deposits is very limited. Rather, only the sovereign risk is there. Next thing is, I want you to know a bit about money supply. So what is money supply? Money supply is the total stock of all the types of money held by the public at any point of time. So tell me, like, does money supply is a stock variable or money supply is a flow variable? बताओ, सोचो, बताना मेरे को क्या है. So it's a total and aggregate value uh, uh, of all the, like, money stock in a economy at a particular time. uh, Here public includes all the economic entities except the bank and the government. Like, RBI is also not included in it. Why? Because it's not the major player. Rather, like, RBI, government and banks, they are actually instruments which actually generate credit, they generate money supply. But it's us people, households, the corporations and all, they are like the public. Here banks are like the suppliers of the deposits, and RBI are the suppliers of the currency. I'll talk about the what does, like, why the depositor and the currency and all of it is important. uh, One thing that I want you to point out is money supply measures the total purchasing power in the economy. So the currency plus deposit money uh, actually, like, includes the money supply. So you would be knowing that the total money supply that exists in the economy is related to the total purchasing power. So it would mean that it's very crucial for, let's say, the growth. Why? Because depending upon the purchasing power, there would be creation of demand, and the demand would actually lead to growth. I hope, like, you are getting my point. So what that the purchasing power actually leads to the demand, and that this demand leads to the growth. Then also purchasing power leads to the inflation. So if, let's say, there is a limited amount of supply and there is a high purchasing power, limited supply and high purchasing power, then large purchasing power would be chasing fewer goods, and then there would be increase in price, and there would be inflation. Then also the purchasing power would also relate to the sectoral dynamics. If, let's say, you want to give impetus to, let's say, solar plants, so what you would make is make the purchase of solar easier, make the credit available for solar cheaper, give concession to it, so that way the solar impetus, this sectoral nudge would be given in. I hope, like, you are understanding my point. That's why ascertaining the money supply, understanding how does total money exist in, is very important. And in all of this context, like, what should be the growth rate, what should be the policy rate, it also impacts the exchange rates also. So this all of this put in context, uh, handling and addressing the concept of money supply becomes very important. So there is a old method by which and is it's like most commonly most prominent used in the present discussions or like across the literature uh, about ascertaining what the aggregate money supply is. So there are, depending upon the liquidity means how easily the money is accessible or how easily that money can actually be put in the transaction. uh, there are various monetary aggregates called as M1, M2, M3 and M4. So M4 is the like most liquid of all, and it's like currency held by the public. Then DD is like the net demand deposits with the banks, and it includes only public deposits in the bank, but interbank deposits are not included. So if let's say there is a SBI and then ICICI ने SBI में डिपॉजिट रखा और SBI ने ICICI में, तो फिर ये इंक्लूड नहीं रहेगा, बट ओनली लाइक द डिपॉजिट्स ऑफ पब्लिक विद द बैंक, currency with the public and other deposits with the RBI, they are actually included in the M1. It's like the most common of all, like most liquid of all. Then there is M2, which includes not only like the M1 but also like saving bank deposit with the post office. So M2 is highly liquid, but it's not 100% liquid. Why? Because there are certain restrictions in the post office savings things. Then M3, which is like the broad money. So it's M3 is currency with the public. Then there's a demand deposit, then other deposit, and then there are term deposits with the bank. So DD and TD is total demand and time liability. So demand, like these are extension of. So we already talked about the fact that our deposits are what they are the liabilities for banks. सो डिमांड डिपॉजिट क्या है कि जो हमारे सेविंग्स अकाउंट में या फिर हम जो डिमांड में मांग सकते हो, डिमांड लाइबिलिटीज है, और जो टाइम मतलब फिक्स डिपॉजिट्स है, आरडीज है, सर्टिफिकेट ऑफ डिपॉजिट्स है, वो टाइम लाइबिलिटीज है. बस इसमें इतना कुछ ज्यादा दिमाग लगाने की जरूरत नहीं है. सो व्हेन लाइक द saving deposit and then time deposits of the banks are included, then it becomes M3, and there is a M4 which is like more broader but least public, when the total deposits with the post office are also included. What happened that after like 1997, uh, this concept of aggregate got a bit changed. I mean, not much of a change, just only few changes are there, whereby they included the term reserve money. What reserve money is? Reserve money is the uh, uh, total, I mean the total so reserve money or high powered money is the total stock of currency held by the public. So it actually includes like the currencies bankers deposit with RBI and other deposits. So what the high powered money, or it's a total liability or the monetary total liability of the monetary authority of the country, which is RBI. So what it is reserve money is like the most liquid. It is the most liquid. Why? Because it includes only the currency. So what high powered money is, the currency is the primary money. It's like the total stock of currency and the deposits bankers deposit with RBI and the other deposit with RBI. It's like the total liability of the monetary authority of the country. uh, then then there are like M1, M2 and M3 as a monetary aggregates. M1 is a narrow money which is like the currency with the public and demand deposits with the banks. Then there is a M2 which is the intermediate money, where is a M1 plus time liabilities but plus the certificate of deposits, and M3 then there's a broad money uh, which, which is M2 plus term deposits. So M3 is generally like considered as the broad money, which includes like the term deposits, the call borrowings, and FCNRB deposits and everything. I mean, so it's like the broadest and grandest measure of it, and then this is the most liquid of it. अब देखो ये क्या क्या इंक्लूड करता है, क्या क्या इन दोनों में कंफ्यूजन हो सकता है, कंफ्यूजन करवाना नहीं है. यू वुड से दैट जैसे जैसे बढ़ता है वैसे वैसे लिक्विडिटी कम होती जाती है, एंड द कॉन्सेप्ट of the money aggregate becomes larger. It all depends upon the purchasing power. That's the first and foremost you need to think to understand ki M3 is like the most broadest of all, and it shows the total purchasing power in the economy. And purchasing power, it's created by the currency and the bank loans. M4 does not include like the, अब ये कुछ कुछ है कि M4 does not include like the KVP and NS input नहीं होते, अब इतना relevant नहीं है, but since हम लोग इतना करवा ही रहे तो फिर ये इतना देख भी लो. But M0 and M3 you need to understand, you need to pay much of attention to the fact that like M0 is the reserve money. It's the like the total stock of currency held by the public and banks, and it's like the total liability of the monetary authority. How, what are the bankers' deposits with RBI? So they are like the CRR, SLR, or other cash deposit that they need to keep with it. And then I mean like there are other deposits, and then there are I'm sorry, so bankers deposit with RBI are CRR, which like banks have to keep up with RBI. And then there are other deposit like from time and again RBI asks to bank to put in. Based on it, I want you to know what, how does like the changes in money supply happen in. Please understand this concept like very well, because when we are going to discuss the instruments of monetary policy in the next session, uh, this concept of development of money supply becomes very crucial, and this has been asked in the prelims 2 times also. So first thing is, how does like the money supply in the economy change? We got to know that like there is M0, M1, M2, M3, and the stuff, the other things, those are like the money aggregates. But how does like the money aggregate change in? How does, the question would be like, let's say if total liability of the RBI increases by rupees 100, does the purchasing power of the economy increases by the 100, or it increases by more than 100, or it increases by less than 100? थोड़ा सा मैं एक बार और क्लियर करना चाहूंगा. What happens, the money actually is infused in the economy when RBI creates a liability for it. आरबीआई ने खुद के नाम, अगर आरबीआई ने 100 करोड़ रुपए के नोट बनाए तो फिर 100 करोड़ रुपए की आरबीआई की लायबिलिटी बनी. बट एग्रीगेट मनी क्या है? एग्रीगेट मनी क्या है? एग्रीगेट मनी तो परचेसिंग पावर है. तो अगर आरबीआई ने 100 करोड़ रुपीस की लायबिलिटी बनाई तो परचेसिंग पावर कितने रुपए से बढ़ेगी? या फिर मुझे सोलर पावर में बूस्ट देना है, मैं चाहता हूं कि भैया इंडिया में 5,000 करोड़ के सोलर पावर प्लांट्स लगे, तो 5,000 करोड़ के सोलर प्लांट लगाएं तो फिर 5,000 करोड़ की परचेसिंग पावर भी बनानी पड़ेगी. तो 5,000 की परचेसिंग पावर बनाने के लिए आरबीआई को कितने रुपए की मॉनेटरी लायबिलिटी बढ़ानी पड़ेगी? या फिर मी एज अ गवर्नमेंट मुझे कितनी अमाउंट के बॉन्ड इन्फ्यूज करने पड़ेंगे, या फिर मुझे क्या मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी मेजर्स लेने पड़ेंगे ताकि 5,000 करोड़ की परचेसिंग पावर गवर्नमेंट के पास बने, लोगों के पास बने और वो सोलर ले पाए. सिमिलर इज द केस विद लाइक, चलो मैंने सोचा कि अब मुझे अगेन माय फेवरेट थार, मुझे लगता है कि भैया सबके पास में थार होनी चाहिए. तो सबके पास में थार होने के लिए मुझे सबके पास में 25 लाख रुपए की, ₹25 लाख की परचेसिंग पावर जनरेट करनी पड़ेगी. तो वो 25 लाख की परचेसिंग पावर जनरेट करने के लिए गवर्नमेंट को कितनी डेट बनानी पड़ेगी, आरबीआई की कितनी लायबिलिटी बनानी पड़ेगी? और ऐसा ना हो कि मैं 25 लाख रुपए की थार की लायबिलिटी बढ़ा रहा हूं, मतलब थार के लिए परचेसिंग पावर बढ़ा रहा हूं, पता चला लोगों को चाहिए ओल्ड मॉन्क, तो लोगों ने क्या किया कि लोगों ने ओल्ड मॉन्क ही खरीदना स्टार्ट किया, या फिर लोगों ने स्टार्ट किया कि भाई मेरे को तो अंगूर ही खरीदने हैं, लोगों ने अंगूर ही खरीदना स्टार्ट कर दिया. अंगूर की सप्लाई कम थी तो फिर अंगूर की ही प्राइस बढ़े. तो ऑल ऑफ दिस बिकम्स वेरी क्रूशियल इन द कंटेक्स्ट की हाउ डज लाइक मनी सप्लाई फंक्शंस इन इट, वो जानना बहुत जरूरी रहता है. सो दैट्स व्हाई लाइक आई होप लाइक यू आर गेटिंग द कंटेक्स्ट ऑफ इट कि व्हाई आई एम pursuing, why I am pushing you so hard to like understand this. So there is a something called as currency deposit ratio. What happens that if let's say you as a person has 100 rupees, what portion of that 100 rupees you are keeping with yourself, and what portion of that money you are keeping with the bank? That why this becomes very central is because if let's say if let's say when you deposit in bank, you earn certain interest, you get certain loans, you have like certain benefits. So what happens, you making a decision to deposit your money in bank is actually driven by your interest motive. However, when you keep your money in cash, you actually like have opportunity cost of losing out on interest. So that's why this currency deposit ratio becomes very crucial. Then there is a reserve deposit ratio. So what happens for the bank? So if let's say you have gone to the bank and तुम्हारे पास में 100 रुपए है, you deposit 50 rupees in the bank and you keep 50 rupees with yourself. So currency deposit ratio would be of the one, 50/50. Deposit CU upon DD. मतलब तुमने कितना डिपॉजिट किया, कितना तुम्हारे पास है. Then there is a reserve deposit ratio. So portion of deposits which of total deposit which banks keep as a reserve. So what happens, you are a bank, तुम घर से तो पैसा नहीं दोगे किसी को इंटरेस्ट दे रहे हो, तो व्हाट यू डू इज यू टेक सर्टेन डिपॉजिट्स फ्रॉम पीपल एंड देन यू लेंड आउट टू देम. तुम लोगों को 7% पे एफडी पे इंटरेस्ट रेट देते हो, यू गिव इंटरेस्ट टू द पीपल एट 7% फॉर द डिपॉजिट्स एंड देन यू गिव लोन्स टू पीपल एट 9%. So this 2% is actually called as your spread, and this spread is your interest earning. But if let's say you have 100 rupees of deposit, you cannot totally lend those 100 rupees. Why? Because you need to keep certain reserves to actually make yourself liquidate, to make yourself like comfortably in liquid, to make yourself like to reduce your risk of being bankrupt and so on. So we'll see when we'll discuss about banking, but you need to put certain cash deposit with yourself as a reserve. So with themselves you put as in cash vaults, or you put them in deposits with RBI. In the context of it, these two ratios, so there is, so let me first tell you how actually is credit or how actually is money created in the economy. So what happens, you are an RBI and you have an intention of infusing rupees 100 in the economy. So what would you do? There is a seller, you would ask the seller to sell you either gold or the bonds of 100 rupees. Then you buy from the seller 100 rupees of bond and you give him a check, and you have infused 100 rupees of liability. You have given 100 rupees of check to the seller, so that way you have injected the money. Again, I like, on the basis of request I am explaining you in Hindi also. तुम आरबीआई हो, तुम्हें 100 रुपीज का मनी इन्फ्यूज करना है, तो फिर यू फाइंड अ सेलर. तुम सेलर को बोलते हो कि भैया मेरे को 100 रुपए का तुम्हारा गोल्ड दो या फिर 100 रुपए का तुम्हारा बॉन्ड दो, जो जो भी तुम्हारे पास है, और तुम मेरे से चेक ले जाओ 100 रुपए का, जिसके सहारे मैं मनी इंजेक्ट करूं. तो सेलर के पास में, सेलर ने आरबीआई को गोल्ड या फिर बॉन्ड दिए और आरबीआई से 100 रुपए का चेक लिया. सेलर गया बैंक के पास में, seller went to the bank and seller asked the bank to encash the check which was given by RBI of the 100 rupees in his name. ठीक है, तो here what happened, in the initially RBI का liability only increased by the 100 rupees. Why? Because in the beginning RBI only gave 100 rupees of check to the seller. Then what does bank would do? Bank would take the 100 rupees of that check, and bank would actually give 50 rupees of cash to the seller, and bank would keep 50 rupees of deposit with himself or herself. Why? Because let's say there was this currency deposit ratio of 1 was there. Which one? This currency deposit ratio of 1 is there. What the seller would do? Seller has a claim of 100 rupees from the bank, but due to CDR being 1, assumed CDR being 1, seller only takes out 50 rupees and seller keeps 50 rupees at deposits with the banks. So banks asset increased by 100. Why? Because bank has the 100 rupees check of the RBI. bank RBI owes bank 100 rupees. However, bank's liabilities increased by rupees 50. Why? Because like the bank's 50 rupee deposit of the seller is there. However, bank's asset also decreased by 50 rupees. Why? Because like the 50 rupees cash was given to the seller. Now what happens? With this 50 rupees, bank keeps 10 rupees as a RDR. Remember, there was 100 rupees of this created by it. Then and then there was this 50 rupees of liability which was created with the bank. Bank, what bank would do? Bank has the deposits. Now bank needs to generate some income, some profit from it. So what bank would do? Bank, with this liability, bank would convert this liability to the asset. So they would keep 10 rupees as a RDR for the reserves, and rather they would loan out the 50 rupees that they have, and these 50 rupees are given to someone as a loan, and that would be given as a factor payment or income or investment to someone. So what they would do is like उससे वो फैक्ट्री बनाएगा, उससे वो या फिर अब कोई कार खरीदेगा, मतलब जो भी मीन्स ऑफ प्रोडक्शन में इकोनॉमी में इन्फ्यूज किया वो. तो अब इन 40 से क्या रहेगा कि इस 40 का that would become the payment for someone as a 40 rupees. तो उस 40 में भी सिंस देयर इज लाइक आवर CDR इज ऑफ 1, 20 रुपीज वो वापस से कैश आउट कर लेगा, 20 रुपीज अब वो वापस से बैंक में रखेगा जिसको फैक्टर पेमेंट मिला. अगेन इस 20 का भी वो 10 रुपया बैंक में रखेगा, 10 रुपया वो करेगा. अगेन इस कैश का भी तो वो कुछ यूज करेगा. तो व्हाट वुड हैपन, इवन दो देयर इज लाइक 100 रुपीज ऑफ infusion by the bank, which is like the net high powered money, like the liability of the bank increased only by 100, but the all the aggregate money supply increases by more than 100. How would I know? Like there is a calculation for it. वो एक ऐसे सीरीज बनती जाएगी, फिर अब ये 5 बनेंगे, फिर अब ये 2.5 बनेंगे, एंड देन फ्रॉम दैट यू वुड बी नोइंग इन सबका एक इनफाइनाइट सीरीज का सम बनता है, एंड इनफाइनाइट सीरीज का सम से like it becomes a factor of something which is like greater than 100, factor of something which is like greater than 100. So to what extent this money supply at the end increases to the initial liability which was increased by the RBI is actually the money supply. फिर से एक बार मैं एक्सप्लेन करता हूं. आरबीआई ने सेलर से बॉन्ड, आरबीआई को कुछ एग्रीगेट इन्फ्यूज करना था, एंड व्हाट डज आरबीआई डू? आरबीआई ने किसी सेलर से गोल्ड या फिर बॉन्ड लिया, फिर उसको अपने नाम का चेक दिया. अब चेक आरबीआई की टोटल लाइबिलिटी इंक्रीज हुई 100 रुपए से, बट अब सेलर क्या करेगा उस चेक का? सेलर अपने बैंक में जाएगा, सेलर अपने बैंक में जाके डिपॉजिट करेगा. सिंस उसमें कुछ सीडीआर है, उसमें कुछ आरडीआर है, वो सारा का सारा कैश थोड़ी ना लेगा, वो भी तो बोलेगा कि भाई मेरे को भी तो कुछ इंटरेस्ट कमाना है, तो फिर कुछ पैसा वो डिपॉजिट्स में ही रखेगा. तो लेट्स से कि वो 50 डिपॉजिट में ही रखता है, 50 कैश में ही रखता है. बैंक का 50 रुपए से लाइबिलिटी बढ़ता है और बैंक का 50 रुपए से एसेट्स कम होते हैं जो कि उसके पास करेंसी थे, बट एट द सेम टाइम बैंक के 100 रुपए से एसेट्स बढ़ते भी है. वो कैसे? क्योंकि बैंक के पास में आरबीआई का क्लेम है. तो फिर बैंक ये 50 रुपए के डिपॉजिट्स को 10 रुपए रिजर्व में रखती है, 40 रुपए और लोन आउट करती है. फिर अगेन अब ये 40 रुपए का लोन किसी ना किसी डेवलपमेंटल एक्टिविटी में, किसी किसी फैक्ट्री में, किसी ना किसी को जाएगा ही ना. मतलब पैसा लेके क्या करेगा? या तो उसे वो फैक्ट्री बनाएगा, या तो उसे लेबर देगा, या तो उसको रेंट देगा, या तो उसके इंटरेस्ट देगा. तो किसी ना किसी की वो इनकम है ही. तो फिर इनकम जिसके पास जाएगी, फिर वो भी सेम काम करेगा कि लेट्स से वो कुछ पैसा डिपॉजिट करेगा बैंक में और कुछ पैसा वो खुद कैश में रखेगा. फिर अगेन बैंक ये जो 20 रुपीज का डिपॉजिट आया है, इसको अगेन कुछ आरडीआर रख के वापस से लोन आउट करेगी. तो ये जो पूरा है ये एग्रीगेट मनी सप्लाई का पार्ट बन रहा है. एंड व्हाट इज दिस 100 रुपीज वाज द इनिशियल, this 100 rupees was the initial liability. So M0 was this high powered money, and the entire this thing is the aggregate money or broad money. So the ratio of money supply to the reserve money is called as money multiplier. आरबीआई ने 100 रुपए ही करे थे, पर एंड में आते आते इकोनॉमी में इन्फ्यूज होते होते वो लेट्स से 150 रुपए से बन गए. तो 150 upon 100, so 1.5 is the money multiplier. I hope like you are understanding this. This is a very, very important concept, and you should know this, that money multiplier is ratio of money supply to the reserve money, and it actually depends upon the lending capacity, CDR, RDI, and number of factors. We'll discuss those factors in the next class. But I guess you should understand this thing, that the entire process of economy how works in this way. बेस्ड ऑन दिस, बेस्ड ऑन हाउ, अब इसमें क्या रहेगा, हम विल एड गवर्नमेंट इन नेक्स्ट क्लास टू सी लाइक हाउ गवर्नमेंट by these instruments control this money supply. We'll understand various instruments like CRR, SLR, the LTRO, long term repo operations. Then we'll understand swaps and so on. But first, for this basic understanding, this basic flow must be studied well. एंड यू मस्ट बी क्लियर विद द कंसेप्ट ऑफ मनी सप्लाई कि 100 रुपए, भले 100 रुपए से ही भले ही गवर्नमेंट की आरबीआई की liability बढ़ी हो, but the purchasing power gets increased by the quantity more than 100 rupees. Why? Because there is a money multiplier. I hope this is helpful. Please like understand this well. If you have any doubts, please get back to me, and in the next session we will talk about what are instruments of it, how does like money monetary policy transmission takes in. Till then, all the best, and Jai Hind. Hello. Welcome to this session 4 of the economy aspects of our skeleton key program. And in the last session, we started with the monetary policy, and we majorly talked about how does like the uh, money actually works in. Additionally, we also sought about to discuss what are various measures by which like the money aggregates are measured, and also like how, and the most and one of the foremost concept which we talked about is creation of money supply, whereby how does like the aggregate purchasing power is related with the overall liability of the central monetary authority was linked by us. So we saw that like rise in 100 rupees liability of the RBI, which is like the reserve money, actually led to greater than 100 rupees rise in the overall purchasing power or the overall aggregate money supply. So based on these concept, we will be building on in this session. So first and foremost thing is, let's think on ponder upon on what factors does the credit creation capacity of the banks depend upon. Since in the entirety of the system, the banks were the major players who were actually like creating the credit, because they were the creating liabilities, and then they were creating assets from them, and then those assets were like went on to create additional credit for the consumers, and also to the investors as well. So when we know that like the banks and the banking intermediaries are the major players in the credit creation of the across the entire economy, the banking habit of the people particularly is of the very highest significance to actually know that what the credit creation capacity of the banks is. So if let's say there is a increased banking habit of the people due to financial inclusion, then what would people do? People would be having higher deposits. So these higher deposits would actually be make the lower cost of borrowing and lending for the banks, and then they would like infuse larger credit, and that this would be make the credit cheaper. So the additional credit creation, additional borrowing creation, and everything is driven by the financial inclusion and banking habits of the people. To discuss you further, like why does the black money is like major nemesis can be understood from this thing. So black money nemesis क्यों है, ये इस चीज की वजह से भी दिख सकता है, क्योंकि black money is that money which is out of this banking system. So that part of the economy which would be a significant won't enter the actual financial systems, and this lack of entry would mean that there would be limited resources with the banks, so there would be a decrease in their lending capacity and higher credit for them, higher credit for the the investors and the consumers and so on. So that would, higher credit would mean that there would be the lower demand. So in the entirety, that's how the financial inclusion and lack of it actually impacts the credit creation capacity. The next is the monetary policy. I mean, of course, the way by which, how does the interest rates are there in the system, what are different instruments and all, we'll see it. But like the monetary policy tools like the CRR, the SLR, the bank rates, uh, uh, MSF, marginal standing facility, these all factors actually like are of the highest significance when we talk about the higher credit creation capacity of the bank. Why? Because if let's say the monetary policy rates are higher for the banks from the RBI, then what would happen? Banks would be having lower resources available to them, lower resources with them, and these lower resources would mean that lower credit creation. So the cycle remains the same. I want you to know, I want you to build such linkages. That's why I am, every time there is a linkage based question, every time there is something like which I can explain, I'll explain this. Because if you are able to build such linkages, if you are able to build such connections among the complex systems, economy will never be a problem for you. Why? Because you can actually visualize what sort of systems that actually work in. Then the next would be the policy transmission. If let's say you have already reduced the rates, but the reduction, and who are you? You are RBI. So RBI ने अगर rate कम कर दिए, but what happens? The reduction in rate does not travel from the banks to the from the RBI to the banks and to the consumer. So like here the RBI, there is a bank, and then there is an entire system. So the way like 100 rupee creation of a liability by RBI transmits across the economy is actually like put in place via transmission of monetary policy. So what happens? Even though RBI makes cheaper credit, but the cheaper credit doesn't get transferred to the banks or to the consumer. There are various ways by which this doesn't happen. I'll be discussing this in today's session itself. And next is status of bank. I mean, if let's say the banks have very poor asset quality, what are assets of bank? Loans. So if let's say the loans given by banks have poor performing, what means? They are NPAs. What means? That they have risk of getting closed, I mean getting not getting paid, then in that case banks run the risk of getting bankrupt. So that's why the status and the quality of banks actually has the greatest role in the credit creation capacity of the banks. If banks have a good balance sheets, then they would mean that like they have cleaner records. They would mean that they would have, they can actually leverage more of their deposits to lending, and thus more will be the credit creation. I hope like you are understanding all the four linkages from here. Let me explain it to one more time. In the entirety of the process of the credit creation and the monetary policy transmission, बैंकों के पास में सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट रोल रहता है. बिकॉज वाई? बैंक्स act as the intermediaries between the central bank and the consumer. अगर बैंक्स का मेजर रोल है तो फिर बैंकिंग हैबिट ऑफ द पीपल एंड देयर फाइनेंशियल इंक्लूजन प्लेज द ग्रेटेस्ट रोल. कैसे? अब अगर लोगों की बैंकिंग हैबिट ज्यादा है तो फिर वो ज्यादा डिपॉजिट करेंगे बैंक में पैसे, तो फिर बैंक्स के पास में ज्यादा मनी होगा लेंड करने के लिए, ज्यादा मनी होगा लेंड करने के लिए, तो फिर व्हाट दे विल डू, दे विल गिव क्रेडिट चीपर, सस्ते में पैसे देंगे लोगों को और उसके बाद में ज्यादा लोगों को पैसे देंगे. सो दैट्स व्हाई क्रेडिट क्रिएशन बिकम्स लार्जर. ऑन द कॉन्ट्ररी टू इट, व्हेन देयर इज अ ब्लैक मनी, जबकि लोगों के पास, या फिर जहां पे बैंकिंग हैबिट कम है वहां पे बैंक के पास में डिपॉजिट भी कम है, तो फिर वहां पे बैंक के पास में लेंड करने के लिए भी कम है, तो फिर वहां पे कॉस्टलियर and lower credit होगा. Got it. Second is monetary policy transmission. So बैंक्स के पास में पैसा जो आता है वो केवल डिपॉजिट से ही नहीं आता, तो वो आरबीआई की बोरोइंग से भी आता है. तो मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी रेट्स आर दोज रेट्स जनरली बाय विच बैंक्स बोरो फ्रॉम द आरबीआई. अब वो या फिर बैंक्स कीप दैट मनी विथ आरबीआई. ऐसे बहुत सारे रेट्स रहते हैं, हम लोग ये इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स के बारे में पढ़ेंगे. पर यहां पे समझने वाली बात है कि ये जो रेट्स है ना, अगर ये रेट ज्यादा रहेंगे तो फिर व्हाट हैपन, banks will have the higher cost of borrowing, higher cost of deposits, so they will be giving low credit. Third is monetary policy transmission. Even though there are lower interest rates, even though like there are the signaling of it, पर अगर ट्रांसमिशन ही नहीं हो रहा, मतलब जिस तरीके से आरबीआई के बैंक के पास में जा रहा है और बैंक से कंज्यूमर के, फिर कंज्यूमर से और इंटरमीडिएट के पास में जा रहा है, अगर ये सिस्टम ही नहीं चल रहा, विच इज कॉल्ड एज मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी ट्रांसमिशन, ये नहीं है, तो फिर ये भी क्रेडिट क्रिएशन कैपेसिटी को इंपैक्ट करता है. एंड फोर्थ इज स्टेटस ऑफ बैंक्स. अगर बैंक्स की एसेट क्वालिटी पुअर है तो फिर बैंक क्या करेगी, हिचकिचाएगी लोन देने में. बैंक बोलेगी क्या पता यार ये भी डूब जाए, मुझे नहीं पता. तो फिर the bank will prefer to keep those assets with themselves, or rather have they been safest of the condition, or that will, or they will lend on the higher interest rate. Why? Because वो बोलेगा कि डूबेगा तो भी चलेगा, ज्यादा रिस्क लेंगे, रिस्क है तो मतलब इश्क है, कहने वाली बात. तो एसेट क्वालिटी ऑफ द बैंक्स, एसेट क्या है, बैंक के लोन्स है, तो फिर बैंक के लोन्स कितने क्वालिटी के हैं, उसमें एनपीएस कैसे है, क्रेडिट वर्दीनेस है क्या बोरोवर का, उस बेसिस पे स्टेटस ऑफ बैंक्स क्रेडिट क्रिएशन डिसाइड करता है. बट इन एनी ऑफ द केसेस दी, even though like the money supply is 100, the money supply increases more than 100 in the entire process. We have looked at it from the previous basis. Moving forward, let's discuss how does like the monetary system in India work. So monetary meant by the money, and here I'll be talking particularly about the system of printing of currency and what are how like the money is created in India. Till few years ago, like I mean in the initial days, we had the managed currency system. So what issue of new money is actually exclusive right of RBI. RBI it, only and only RBI can actually like issue new money. तभी तो वो नोट पे लिखा हुआ रहता है कि मैं अदा धारक को अदा करने का वचन लेता हूं, और फिर आरबीआई गवर्नर के साइन रहते हैं. तो that's what it means, that exclusive right of RBI. But like union government is also responsible for increase and decrease of money supply. Why? Because the RBI is actually banker to government. So how and why the government actually sells its bonds and creates its deposits or takes out loans also impact the money supply. तो ये भी एक फैक्ट है. I'll be discussing in next session RBI and its functions. There I will discuss it in further. पर अभी ये समझ लो कि since RBI जो है वो गवर्नमेंट की बैंक है, तो फिर हम लोग को जैसे जब भी लोन चाहिए रहता है, when we want to create deposits, when we want to create assets, when we want to like create borrowings, उन सब केस में what we will do, we go to banks. Similarly, government goes to the RBI and RBI does it via printing of notes, creation of notes or creation of money. तो ये एक सिस्टम था. पर अभी क्या है कि and that system was done with the and that system in the earlier days was done on the basis of minimum reserve system. So what does minimum reserve system means? RBI had to keep a portion as a reserves to actually secure printing of money, and that was actually like rupees 200 crore. अभी भी उतना ही है जितना तब था. एंड इवन इन दैट 115 करोड़ का गोल्ड है, और फिर रिमेनिंग 85 करोड़ का फॉरेन सिक्योरिटीज एंड बाकी सब कुछ है. तो टोटल रिजर्व जो है ना वो कुछ लगभग 200 करोड़ रुपए के. एंड दे कीप दिस रिजर्व सिस्टम टू एक्ट एज अ सिक्योरिटी, एक्ट एज अ ट्रस्ट इन द करेंसी विच इज एक्चुअली इशूड बाय द आरबीआई. तो लोगों में ट्रस्ट रही कि अब भाई कोई पैसा, सैम कल वाले सेशन वाला सैम आया, सैम ऑस्ट्रेलियन सिटीजन है, सैम 500 रुपए का नोट लेके गया अपने आरबीआई के पास में, उसने बोला कि भैया मेरे को तो तुम्हारे पे बिलीव नहीं आ रहा, मेरे को अपना 500 रुपए का जो भी परचेसिंग पावर होता है वो मेरे को दो। तो फिर इस 500 इस फॉरेन सिक्योरिटीज में से ऑस्ट्रेलियन डॉलर निकाले और आरबीआई ने उसको दे दिए। तो दैट्स हाउ इट वर्क्स। बट थियोरेटिकली ये वैसे ऐसे वर्क करता है, प्रैक्टिकली ऐसे वर्क नहीं करता, बिकॉज व्हाई वी हैव सोवेरेन गवर्नमेंट। सोवेरेन गवर्नमेंट हैज द कंसोलिडेटेड फंड ऑफ इंडिया, कि जिसके बेसिस पे हम लोग बहुत सारी चीजें कर सकते हैं। देन ऑल्सो वी हैव आरबीआई हैज द रिजर्व्स, देन गवर्नमेंट हैज बॉन्ड्स। तो बहुत सारी चीजें हैं कि जो कॉन्फिडेंस बना के रखते हैं, दैट मेंटेन ट्रस्ट, दैट क्रिएट ऑल ऑफ इट। दूसरी बात क्या है कि करंटली अभी रुपीज 20 लाख करोड़ से भी ज्यादा कैश है। अगर 20 लाख करोड़ से भी ज्यादा कैश है तो फिर 200 करोड़ रुपए का रिजर्व लेके आप क्या करोगे? कुछ सेंस भी नहीं बनता। सो दैट्स व्हाई लाइक द मिनिमम रिजर्व सिस्टम actually like currently works in, it's only the minimum reserve, but it's not actually like the pegged or the, I mean, full bodied system, या फिर fully uh, uh, tokenized system, or what what can be the name for it? Fully, here it is given, uh, uh, here representative full bodied, whereby like the assets are backing it. So it's actually like the partially full bodied, not the completely full bodied, and it's a based on the minimum reserve. And you just need to know that like the RBI only has the exclusive right to print, like exclusive right to issue notes. However, usme there is only one cash, like rupees one note is actually rupees one. So there is one catch, which is that, let me, rupees one note and coins are actually issued by Ministry of Finance. So I guess like even if the such statement comes in the paper whereby like they ask you ki issue of new money is exclusive right of RBI, तो फिर उसको सही बोल सकते हो in the saying the context, because this is an exception. But but the entire monetary policy and entire monetary system works in this on this basis. So I hope like you'll be able to do it with, but it's good to know about this detail. Uh, Another thing is that subject to maintenance of such reserves, the RBI is empowered to print unlimited currency against backing of gold, foreign securities, and securities of government of India. So RBI is actually empowered to print unlimited money, but depending upon whatever monetary policy it has, depending upon whatever macroeconomic measures there are, and depending upon what sort of growth, development, inflation trajectories are there, RBI takes into account what to do and what not to do. But you need to know a bit of thing is that gold are 115 crore, and then foreign securities are right less 85 crore rupees, and then there are close to 200 crore rupees of it. उसके बाद में printing of money by RBI is actually done in two ways. अब इससे भी ज्यादा तरीके हो सकते हैं, पर बात यह है कि दो तरीके तुमको पता करना बहुत जरूरी है या फिर जानना बहुत जरूरी है. सो फर्स्ट अमॉन्ग्स देम इज दिस थिंग विच इज कॉल्ड एज प्राइमरी सब्सक्रिप्शन, which is deficit financing. So what does RBI do? RBI asks, rather what does government do? Government actually issues bonds of, let's say, rupees I'm sorry, just give me a second, I'll have some water. So first is primary subscription of government bonds by RBI. So what does government want? Government wants RBI to print some money and give it to him. So what does government do? Government takes out a bond paper and gives uh, writes 10 crore bonds and gives it to RBI, whereby it would say that RBI, you take my bonds and you give me money. RBI says, how will I do? Government says that you go, you print money for the 10 crore rupees and then give them to me and take my bonds. I'll pay you back after a certain period. That's what the bond means ना. Bond क्या है? Bond एक डेट इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स है कि जिसके अनुसार एक फ्यूचर डेट पे जिसके पास में बॉन्ड है उसको जो फेस वैल्यू है उसके हिसाब से पैसे मिलते हैं. तो ये जो 10 करोड़ के बॉन्ड जो गवर्नमेंट ने इशू करे हैं, जो एक कमिटमेंट है, एक ऑब्लिगेशन है फ्यूचर डेट पे पे बैक करने का, वो उसने आरबीआई को दिए और आरबीआई ने डायरेक्टली मनी प्रिंट करके गवर्नमेंट को 100 करोड़ रुपए दिए. ये तो सबसे पहला तरीका है. ये क्या है? प्रिंटिंग मनी है. ये है डेफिसिट फाइनेंसिंग है. अनदर वे what it is, government goes to the RBI and says, I want a bit of debt from you, I want something more from you, I want something like a bit of debt from you. So what does government do? Government goes to the RBI, which is government's banker. Then what will the RBI do? RBI, rather than like giving money directly to the government, RBI would ask government to give him or her rupees 10 crore bonds. And here, instead of printing money directly, government would actually sell and auction those bonds to the ICICI or other banks, or let's say like you and me via RBI retail direct portal. And the 10 crore money collected from the auction of those bonds would actually be given to the RBI. So this is called as like the uh, uh, this is actually called as fiscal deficit financing. So what government is doing? Government is actually borrowing from ICICI. Government is borrowing from the market. Government is borrowing from the citizens and all the stuff, the other things. So in all of it, like the creation of credit is actually, or the infusion of money in the economy is done by the government. However, in one case, what happens? The money is directly printed out by the government and it's called as primary subscription. But in second case, government is actually borrowing from the market and trying to infuse the money via credit creation, like the system which we had done earlier. So deficit financing is whereby MO increases. What was MO? MO was high powered money. MO was total liability of the central bank. Liability of central bank. So all the money in circulation, what is the liability of the central bank, and it leads to printing of money. However, when RBI sells the same government securities to other banks like the ICICI and collects money and gives it to government, it's not the deficit financing. Why? Because like I mean, government, the liability of the central bank hasn't increased by much. But what happened? Liability of the government has increased. The debt of the government has increased. The fiscal deficits of government have been served well. So it's called as fiscal deficit financing. So even though government has unlimited power to print money, government, it wouldn't actually like serve any purpose of eliminating poverty, because it does not create real resources. Why the real resources aren't being created? In the deficit financing case, government is actually borrowing from the market and then again giving to the market in the hope that this transmission would actually create additional credit, or like they channelize the resources, mobilize the resources to the effective way. So what happens? ICICI के पास में एक्चुअल में डिपॉजिट्स हैं, and those deposits are for, let's say, rupees 10 crore. ICICI was actually not sure where to spend it and what to do with it. RBI takes the bonds of GSEC, which are like the of the highest security and highest grade, and gives 100 crore to the 10 crore to the government. Then government what does? Government spends it on R&D. government spends it on like the creation of infrastructure. This R&D, this infrastructure would actually create spillover of rupees, let's say 78 crore. So this additional 68 crore of growth development actually is motivated in the economy by this action of deficit financing by the government. So this action is actually good, but in actuality, in reality, what happens, these resources aren't actually effectively utilized, or rather there is a case of inflation as well. So though the government has power to print unlimited money, but the printing money cannot eliminate poverty or cross development or growth, because it does not necessarily mean creation of real asset. If let's say government printed 10 crore rupees and then it it was given to hospital, uh, it becomes a good case of use of money. But even in this case also, a real resource is not converted, rather resources of private sector are transferred from the private sector to the government, and the value of money is actually reduced. Why? Because there is additional infusion of money. Let me like discuss it one more time again. uh, Government prints money, and then what happens, there is this becomes in addition to whatever exists in the economy. And this creates additional disposable income. This disposable income, if there are similar kind of goods, then will create inflation. So even if there is a additional impetus to the growth, even if there is an additional focus on creation of valuable asset, but the value of asset themselves increases. Why? Because there is inflation. So this actually nullifies the overall effect of infusion of money. On the contrary, there can be even detrimental effect to it as well, which happens by something called as price level rise or inflation. So take an example of that. So let's say initially there was 1,000 rupees of money supply in the economy, and then there were 100 goods. So out of 100 goods, what happened? They were priced in at a each good was priced in at a 10 rupee. So 70 goods were bought in by the private sector and 30 goods were brought in by the government sector. Assume that thing. But what happens now? Government actually printed 400 rupees. So total amount of money supply in the government became 1400. But since the production of goods is actually 10 itself, now to ensure that for every good to be matched with the supply and with the demand, the price match becomes in. So now 1400 money is chasing for the 100 goods. Earlier 10,000 rupees was chasing the 100 goods. So by this way, the 10 rupee price actually gets risen to 14 rupees. Again, let me explain it one more time. Overall, government can actually print money and actually like give give it to everyone. Government will say that ये लो पैसे, ये लो पैसे, तुम क्यों गरीब हो, तुम क्यों गरीब हो, तुम क्यों गरीब हो. वो ऐसा इसीलिए नहीं करता है, उसके दो कारण है. क्योंकि उससे एडिशनल रिसोर्स नहीं बनता है. देयर इज नो एडिशनल रिसोर्स. व्हाई देयर इज एडिशनल रिसोर्स? गवर्नमेंट इज क्रिएटिंग is printing money from either by borrowing or by focusing on the future borrowing of it. Future borrowing कैसे कि भैया मतलब अब deferred payment देगा, आगे वाला बॉन्ड देगा. उन दोनों केस में printing of money actually leads to reduction in the money value. Why? Because there is no real resource creation. This can be understood by the fact that if let's say there is 1,000 rupees of money in the economy and there are 100 goods, then 1,000 rupees were chasing the 100 goods, creating the price level of 10. However, if government prints the 400 additional rupees, the overall aggregate money supply becomes the 1400. Then what would these 1400 do if the goods remain the same? Then this 1400 would be chasing the 100 goods. Then thus the 10 rupee price would become to the 14 rupees price. Hence, the additional resources are not created, rather only redistribution of resources happens in. And this transfer of resources also is not in good faith. How it's not in good faith? Why? Because there happens a inflation, or rather we can say a inflation tax, which is kind of a hidden tax. So earlier, if let's say government wasn't actually infusing the 400 rupees, private sector was having particular good at rupees 10. But since government has actually infused 400 rupees, private sector now would have to buy the good at 14 rupees. So 4 रुपए से जो बढ़ा वो इन्फ्लेशन टैक्स है. एंड सेकेंडली द इन्फ्लेशन टैक्स से रीडिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ऑफ मनी कैसे हो रहा है? दी 4 रुपीज जो एडिशनली देना पड़ रहा है, that 4 rupees additional is actually financed by the private sector to the government. कैसे? क्योंकि गवर्नमेंट ने जो 400 रुपीज प्रिंट किया है वो या तो टैक्सेशन से वसूल करेगा, या तो वो वसूल करेगा मतलब बोरोइंग से, बोरोइंग फ्रॉम द बैंक्स. तो बोरोइंग फ्रॉम द बैंक्स जो है, ये बोरोइंग फ्रॉम द बैंक्स, ये पैसा किसके पास है? दिस मनी आल्सो बिलोंग्स टू द सिटीजन, हाउस होल्ड पब्लिक्स ना. तो इन दिस सेंस it creates an inflationary tax kind of scenario. So that's why it is always a moral hazard. It's a moral hazard, it's a financial hazard to actually like do the deficit financing and printing of money in this way. This creates actually a bit of like concern. However, there has been significant legal frameworks for it, and the legal framework is the FRBM Act. The legal framework is the FRBM Act, whereby the fiscal responsibility and budgetary management of the governments are actually like made mandated under a legal systematic framework. And then there is like a macroeconomic policy for it, then there is a medium term fiscal policy for it, then there is like how actually like this levels are being decided, what should be the debt level. Everything is actually like mandated, and accountability of the government in doing so is actually mentioned it. So in the pre-reform era, so right now after FRBM, then after like I think 2018, whereby the primary subscription of the RBI, of the government bond by RBI stopped. So primary subscription is stopped. I mean direct printing of money and then giving it to government is actually not possible nowadays. So earlier that was the case. That used to be done by ways and means of advance, that used to be done by the deficit financing and all, but अब नहीं होता वो. अब और होता भी है तो फिर there are many legal regulations for it. So earlier case में reserve money, the money supply was increased by the deficit financing, but after the reforms now in today's era, it's majorly done by few things. First and foremost of it is increase in foreign reserves. So what happens if let's say you are a RBI and someone someone, let's say my friend Naman puts a factory, and Naman puts a chocolate factory. So there is a Mondelez, which is a Japanese company. It wants to invest with the Naman. So what would they do? They would go to Naman and give them 10 million Japanese yen. अब इंडिया में ना ही जापानीज येन लीगल टेंडर है, ना ही कुछ हो सकता है, तो फिर नमन डजंट एक्सेप्ट जापानीज येन. So what does like these Mondelez would do? Mondelez would go to RBI and they would ask them to give rupees equivalent to the 10 million, and then they would give it to Naman. So and RBI would keep those 10 million yen as a reserve with them. So that has been the case, increasing the case with it. Now currently also like our foreign forex reserve have been reached till the extent of almost rupees $600 billion. So this continuous increase in the foreign reserves and equivalent influx of the rupees in the market has been like the major cause of increase in reserve money. Second is there is inherent higher demand for the money. What does inherent higher demand for the money mean? People need money to spend. People need money to actually like make transactions. People need money to actually have the investment. So since there is a rising middle class, there is a rising consumerism, there is a rising growth story of the India's economy, everything means that there is a higher demand for money, and this higher demand for money actually leads to higher reserve money. Then again there is a like increase in net credit to the government. So even though there is a lower deficit financing nowadays, but government borrowing has increased in terms of absolute numbers too. So this government increasing borrowing of the government means that there is increasing reserve money, because we saw that like how does printing of money and how does every system like works in this in the economy. uh, depending upon all the and I mean like the reverse happens. If the dollar leaves India, mo will decrease. Why? Because people will be like cashing out the dollars and then giving in rupee. uh, Now building onto this, I hope like you have understood what reserve money is, how does like it creates inflationary tax, how does like the printing of money takes place. There are various instruments for it. I'll be discussing various instruments in the next session. But every concept, every discussion, every linkages that I am trying to make you build in, that I am trying to make you think of, please be very considerate of it, because like the every flow like here discuss, like I have here discussed, like I here discuss, like I have discussed in the credit creation, then the in the above thing, you need to understand, you need to know about these concepts. Now talk about what actually we talked about, what money is, what are various aggregates for money, what are various functions of money, then how money is actually printed, created, distributed, circulated. Then we need to understand like what's the पॉलिसी बेसिस बिहाइंड इट, मतलब अब ये सब कुछ हो रहा है तो उसके पीछे का प्रिंसिपल क्या है. तो प्रिंसिपल जो है ना, वो प्रिंसिपल है मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी. सो इट्स अ कंपोनेंट ऑफ इकोनॉमिक पॉलिसी थ्रू विच सेंट्रल बैंक रेगुलेट्स द मनी सप्लाई इन द economy. This is very important. So the by which way the central bank regulates the money supply in the economy is actually called as the monetary policy, and it is done by various instruments under which the availability, cost and use of money and credit in the economy is actually regulated. Like I've told you, the instruments, what are the instruments? They can be SLR, they can be CRR, they can be bank rates, they can be LAF, they can be MSF, they can be LTRO, long term repo operations, they can be operation twist, and so on. यूजिंग इन सारे इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स को यूज करके सेंट्रल बैंक अवेलेबिलिटी, कॉस्ट एंड यूज ऑफ मनी एंड क्रेडिट इन द इकोनॉमी रेगुलेट करता है. एंड व्हाट व्हाई ये सब रेगुलेट करना है? क्योंकि इसी रेट पे, बिकॉज ऑफ द मनी, बिकॉज ऑफ इट, प्राइस स्टेबिलिटी एक्चुअली इज मोस्ट इज डिपेंडेंट अपॉन. अभी मैंने बताया ना कि मनी सप्लाई कितना है और गुड्स को हम लोग कांस्टेंट माने, तो फिर कितने गुड्स को चेस कर रहे हैं उसके हिसाब से प्राइस डिसाइड होता है. सेकेंडली, टू प्रमोट इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ, इफ लेट्स से देयर इज अ फॉर इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ, credit is most important factor. Credit is a factor. Also, demand is a factor. क्रेडिट एंड डिमांड दोनों चीजें मनी सप्लाई पे बेस्ड है. अगर बहुत ज्यादा मनी सप्लाई होगा तो फिर चीपर क्रेडिट रहेगा, तो फिर ग्रेटर इन्वेस्टमेंट रहेगी. बहुत ज्यादा मनी सप्लाई रहेगा तो फिर ग्रेटर परचेसिंग पावर रहेगी, हायर डिमांड रहेगी, तो फिर हायर इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ रहेगी. सिमिलर इज द केस विद फाइनेंशियल सेक्टर स्टेबिलिटी. अब इन्फ्लेशन कैसा है उस हिसाब से बैंक्स कैसे फंक्शन करते हैं, काम करेंगे, उसी हिसाब से अदर इकोनॉमिक सिस्टम्स लाइक एनबीएफसीज काम करेंगे, तो फाइनेंशियल सेक्टर के स्टेबिलिटी के लिए. एंड मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग इज एक्सचेंज रेट स्टेबिलिटी के लिए. व्हाई? बिकॉज जैसे हमने यहां पे देखा कि इंक्रीज और डिक्रीज ऑफ फॉरेन रिजर्व्स एक्चुअली क्रिएट्स और reduces the uh, reserve money. On the contrary also happens. If let's say there is a too much of money, then that, what too much of money would mean, that there is a lower demand, and lower demand would mean that lower exchange rates. So lower exchange rate would mean that, like, the costlier foreign currency. So that's how the foreign currency makes. And then again, of course, I mean, there is employment generation. Why? Because growth, development, and everything, like, it's related with the price stability, the group creation of demand, creation of the investable capital, creation of credit, and so on. The main question lies with the fact that we have already talked and discussed a lot that uh, money actually, so let me talk it about one more time. Money actually creates the purchasing power, and it actually creates demand. And actually, the entire exercise of monetary policy is actually a dilemma between two things. It's a trade off between two things. For one thing is inflation control, and another thing is economic growth. So, what happens when we have money? Having large sums of money, having greater aggregate amount of money, means that there is a larger increasing purchasing power, and the increased purchasing power actually means that there is a greater demand for goods, and this greater demand would actually, like, lead to greater investment and greater productive assets, and then, like, greater growth. I hope, like, this cycle is clear to you. However, what happens when there is a greater demand for, growth, goods, uh, there can be a possibility that there wouldn't be commensurate supply. So if let's say there isn't a commensurate supply, then that would automatically lead to the inflation, that is price rise. So the entire exercise between the monetary policy is how to handle this monetary policy dilemma. Why this happens? Like, one of the government actually wants to have the economic growth. It actually wants to have the it wants to showcase the numbers of high GDP growth, high quantitative measures of increased, let's say, the sectoral growth, gross value additions, and so on. However, the monetary authority, which is like often which is the RBI in case, it is mandated with the price control and inflation control in India via monetary policy committee framework, which I'll be discussing about. But moving forward, you should understand that why do we need monetary policy? Why? What's the, like, most significant aspect of it is to handle this monetary policy dilemma, whereby if money supply increases, अगर money supply increase होता है तो फिर उससे aggregate demand बढ़ती है, और aggregate demand बढ़ती है तो फिर उससे growth होती है. On the contrary, aggregate demand बढ़ने से uh, aggregate demand बढ़ने से there can be a case whereby there is not the commensurate increase in the supply, and that would lead to increase in prices. तो इन दोनों के बीच में जो बैलेंसिंग होनी चाहिए वो मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी डिलेमा है. The thing is, RBI wants to achieve the second objective of the policy control. It wants to achieve second objective of economic growth, but it wants to have the first objective of price control. Why? Because of the monetary policy committee. And this monetary policy committee actually is based on the fact that there is a single objective of price control, there is single target of 4 plus minus 2% of CPI targeting, and then single instrument which is of the repo rate. So I hope, like, this entire exercise of monetary policy in India is clear to you. So single objective is price stability. A single target is like the of the CPI, and which is like 4 plus minus 2%, and single instrument is adjusting the repo rate. So what happens, since we have seen that the monetary policy or the policy rate depend upon the repo rate, the reverse repo rate, the SLR, the CLR, the forex, the MTF, and LAF, and so on. So many things are there. but they often get confused with each other, and then establishing a single concrete cause effect relationship becomes quite difficult in that case. So to actually simplify this, Urjit Patel committee in 2015 recommended inflation targeting as the only policy framework, as the only monetary policy benchmark for the monetary system and monetary policy in India, and it is driven by single objective, single target, and single instrument. I hope this is clear. They and now, since we know that, like, how does monetary policy work in India, what are its objective, there are different types of monetary policy, there are different stances of the monetary authority of India which actually guide the market. So actually the entire exercise of monetary policy is not only about the actual thing of the, like, where the money is, what are actual interest, but it is also about the speculation for it, or the future trajectory for it. So this future trajectory and future speculation becomes very crucial with respect to the types of monetary policy. One thing is like the expansionary monetary policy, which is also called as the easy money policy, or also it's often referred as dovish dovish dove dovish monetary policy. So where this monetary policy promotes easier money, it promotes higher money aggregate, and it promotes cheaper money. So it means that there is a cheaper credit also. So what would happen, it would automatically give push to the economic growth, since the easier money would actually like favor the increase in aggregate demand. The easy money would mean that there is decrease in cost of borrowing. So this would mean that, like, the consumer durables or the heavy purchases are actually drawn into. So it is actually favored when there is a economic slowdown or the recession. When there is a not sufficient demand, then generally monetary authorities would tend to have the easy money or expansionary policy. This was very prominent in the case of post COVID-19. Post COVID-19, where there was, like, not only slowdown, but there was decrease in the overall GDP, and governments and monetary policies across the world wanted to have a phenomenon whereby the all the actors and all the players who have transactive motives in the economy would have cheaper access to credit, would who have cheaper money to it. And it is driven by policy instruments like the CRR, SLR, repo rate, reverse rate. We'll be discussing this in the next session, whereby, like, I'll be taking each instrument and discussing how it works with it. But for now, you should know that, like, decrease in the policy rates, decrease in the repo rate, decrease in the borrowing rates, or like the easier money, cheaper money would mean that there is an expansionary monetary policy whereby there is a higher availability of money in the economy. On the contrary, exactly opposite of it is contractionary monetary policy, which is also called a tight or hawkish monetary policy. So whereby, like, the objective, since in the easy money objective was the growth, in the easy money objective was the easier credit, in it was like the increase in the investment and so on. Here that would be exact opposite of it. In the monetary policy dilemma, the entire fight was between whether it was growth or whether it's what's inflation, or whether the between it. So in the contractionary monetary policy, the objective is to control inflation and also check the depreciation of money. What happens in case of the easy money, it means that, let me, like, in case of easy money, there would be higher money availability. So it may lead to, like, depreciation of the money. Why? Because money ज़्यादा है तो फिर अब depreciation, because there can be decrease in demand. So that can actually lead to depreciation of the currency. However, when there is like a depreciation of currency, or when there is a inflation, generally contractionary monetary policy is used, and whereby RBI actually sucks out the liquidity from the economy. So cash measures or the availability of credit, availability of money, availability of aggregates are actually reduced. So here what happens, like the money supply gets reduced, so the demand actually gets reduced, because why, there is a decrease in purchasing power. अब तुम्हारे पास में लोन ही कम अवेलेबल है, कॉस्टलियर लोन्स अवेलेबल है, फिर उसके बाद में मोर चेक्स है, क्वांटिटेटिव मेजर्स है, तो फिर व्हाट यू विल डू, you wouldn't spend that amount of money, rather you will like have it with you, and that would actually like create reduced inflation. It would actually like lower the inflation. On the contrary, since there is a reduced demand, the economic growth will also be slowed down. And so this, both of these contractionary and hawkish monetary policies are often done by something called as open market operations. Open market operations. So open market operations are buying and selling of government securities or bonds by monetary authority, which is RBI. So buying of bonds mean that, so if let's say this is RBI and this is the bond holder, so let me like so this is RBI and this is bond holder. So if let's say RBI is buying bonds, so RBI is buying bonds, buy. So what does when RBI buys bond from it, RBI actually gives buyer the money. So this money actually this money gets in the hands with of the seller, and this money actually like gets transmitted across the monetary policy transmission players, like we discussed in the last session. Similarly, when RBI sells bonds, so when RBI sells bonds, what it does, the buyer actually gives money to RBI. So it sucks money out of the economy. I hope like this is clear for you. I'm discussing it again. And this buying and selling is called as open market operations. We will discuss this in the next class. But what happens when both of these, when like the traditional measures of the CRR, SLR, or the bank rates, CRR, SLR, bank rate, or like the open market operation, when they fail to actually like give impetus to the sluggishness and slowdown in the economy, developed economies have resorted to something called as quantitative easing. तो फिर से एक बार मैं बताता हूं, जो बैंक रेट, सीआरआर, एसएलआर, ओपन मार्केट ऑपरेशंस टाइप के जो ऑपरेशन, जो कि कन्वेंशनल मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी ऑपरेशंस है, उनके सहारे अगर स्लो डाउन कम नहीं हो रहा हो, या फिर ग्रोथ नहीं बढ़ रही हो, या फिर रिसेशन कम नहीं हो रहा हो, तो उस केस में डेवलप्ड इकोनॉमीज की मॉनेटरी अथॉरिटीज एक ऐसा चीज करती है कि जो थोड़ा सा अनकन्वेंशनल रहता है इन टर्म्स ऑफ मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी मेजर्स. इट इज कॉल्ड एज क्वांटिटेटिव ईजिंग. इट्स अ वेरी पॉपुलर थिंग इन इट केम आउट in the most prominent in the 2008 subprime crisis, when there was like the recession in the US due to the subprime crisis and the asset categorization, asset liquidation which happened. But this has again been done by the US Fed in the aftermath of COVID. So what it is, the quantitative easing actually is asset purchase program by the central banks of the countries, and it's generally resorted in the developed countries. In India it is not so much popular. I'll tell you why, but first like you understand, it's generally resorted in the developed countries. It's an asset purchase program, and it's an unconventional measure, and it's generally done when there is when even when there is a low interest rate, there is a sluggish growth, and there is a limited impetus to the increased demand and the increased product and growth uptake. It happens by way of promoting economic growth by three different ways. Firstly, you understand the concept of bond yield. So what bond yield is? So bonds are basically a debt instrument. So if let's say I am a NFU founder and I want to raise some money. So what I do, I raise NFU bonds of let's say coupon rate of 100 of 10%, and I issue them at the face value of 100. So me me as a founder of NFU, I actually raise 100 rupees face value bond at the coupon rate of 10%. What does it mean? So at the maturity, and let's say these are for 10 years. So what happens at the maturity of 10 years, the holder of the bond would get the 100 rupees, and every year the holder of the bond would get 10% interest rate on the face value, which is actually the coupon. However, what happens is NFU would start building up the trust. NFU would start making up the money. NFU would actually be open up new avenues, and people would feel that NFU is more reliable compared to other institutions. So this actually would promote people to buy bonds of NFU, since the 100 rupee bond face value bonds of NFU are favored by the menu. So by the menu, so what they would do is they would ask the holder of the bond and offer them 101 rupees to actually give them the bond of 10 rupee coupon. फिर से एक बार मैं बताता हूं, एनएफयू ने 100 रुपए का एक बॉन्ड 10 साल के लिए निकाला, 10 years, जिसका की कूपन रेट था 10%. तो क्या था, कूपन रेट पे 10% का पैसा लोगों को मिलेगा. अब एनएफयू का बॉन्ड है तो फिर एनएफयू अच्छा काम करता है, एनएफयू का ट्रस्ट है, एनएफयू बढ़िया काम भी कर रहा है, एनएफयू के पास में विश्वासार्हता भी है, पैसा भी है, सब कुछ है. तो बाकी लोगों को क्या लगता है कि बाकी दूसरों के बॉन्ड लेने की बजाय वो एनएफयू के ही बॉन्ड ले ले. पर बॉन्ड, जिसके पास में बॉन्ड है उसको भी तो पैसा कमाना है, वो थोड़ी ना तुमको बॉन्ड देगा. वो तो जिसको बॉन्ड खरीदना है वो बोलेगा कि मेरे को 10 साल बाद 100 रुपया मिलना है ना, तू एक काम कर, मेरे को इसको 101 रुपए का दे दे बॉन्ड. तो 101 रुपए, सो 10 रुपए 100 रुपए उसका फेस वैल्यू था, 101 रुपए उसका प्राइस बन गया, और कूपन तो उसका 10% का वो रहा ही. तो पहले उसको 10/100 विच इज इक्वल टू, कूपन रेट 10 है, ये 100 है, तो फिर अब ये कितना बना, ये बना 10%. तो 10% पहले की ईल्ड बनी. तो पहले जो बॉन्ड होल्डर था उसके पास में उसको 10% रिटर्न ऑन हिज इन्वेस्टमेंट था, या फिर 10% उसकी ईल्ड थी इन द टेक्निकल टर्म्स. पर अब जब किसी ने 101 रुपए में उसका बॉन्ड लिया, तो व्हाट डज इट मीन, उसका ये कितना हुआ, उसका हुआ 10/101. तो ये 10/101 10/100 से तो छोटा ही रहेगा. सो उसको जो एनुअल रिटर्न मिल रहा होगा वो 10% से कम मिल रहा होगा. तो ऐसे बॉन्ड यील्ड जो है वो प्राइस के इनवर्सली प्रोपोर्शनल रहती है. दूसरा बात क्या है कि अगर कोई बॉन्ड ज्यादा सेफ है तो उन बॉन्ड्स के लिए ग्रेटर डिमांड रहेगी. अब जैसे एनएफयू का ही बॉन्ड देख लो, एनएफयू का बॉन्ड हमने 100 रुपीज फेस वैल्यू पे निकाला था, बट सिंस पीपल एंड मार्केट रियलाइज दैट एनएफयू इज अ ट्रस्टवर्दी ऑप्शन, एनएफयू इज अ सेफ ऑप्शन, सो people started approaching NFU for getting their bonds. I mean the secondary bond holders of it. अगर अप्रोच करेंगे तो फिर डिमांड बढ़ेगी तो प्राइस बढ़ेगा, और प्राइस जैसे ही बढ़ेगा वैसे यील्ड कम होगी. कैसे, वो मैंने अभी बताया. कूपन रेट फिक्स रहता है, फेस वैल्यू फिक्स रहती है, पर प्राइस वैरी होता है, यील्ड वैरी होती है. कैसे, दोनों की इनवर्स रिलेशन से. आई होप लाइक यू गॉट द पॉइंट. बहुत लोग इसमें कंफ्यूज रहते हैं, बहुत लोगों को नहीं पता रहता, but this is very important concept and this should be understood. The difference between face value is that value की जो at the maturity of bond 10 साल बाद वो बॉन्ड रिटर्न करके कितना पैसा मिलेगा, वो फेस वैल्यू उसकी. और प्राइस क्या है कि उस टाइम पे वो प्राइस किस रुपीस से बॉन्ड ट्रेड हो रहा है, एक्सचेंज हो रहा है, वो उसका प्राइस है. कूपन रेट क्या है कि फेस वैल्यू के कितना परसेंट पे उसको इंटरेस्ट मिलेगा, वो उसका कूपन है. जनरली ये यील्ड के बराबर नहीं रहता है, या फिर रहता भी, यील्ड के बराबर तभी रहेगा जब प्राइस और फेस वैल्यू सेम रहेगा, पर ये नहीं रहता है. तो क्या रहता है, वो प्राइस जैसे ही बढ़ेगा वैसे वैसे यील्ड कम होगी. क्यों, क्योंकि अगर प्राइस बढ़ेगा तो फिर ग्रेटर डिमांड है, तो फिर लेसर यील्ड है। अब इसको देखने का एक और तरीका क्या है, अगर किसी चीज का हाई प्राइस है तो उसका लो यील्ड रहेगा, और सिंस किसी चीज का हाई प्राइस है, उसका हाई प्राइस है ही इसीलिए क्योंकि वो सेफर ऑप्शन है, क्योंकि उसके पीछे लोअर रिस्क है, तभी तो उस डायरेक्शन में ज्यादा पैसा फ्लो करेगा, तभी तो उस डायरेक्शन में मोर पीपल वुड बी प्रिफर टू हैव दैट बॉन्ड, एंड दैट वुड मीन दैट द बोरोइंग मस्ट बी मेड चीपर फॉर द अदर थिंग्स। वरना लोग जो वरना लोग कोई दूसरा बॉन्ड खरीदेंगे ही नहीं, लोग केवल एनएफयू का ही बॉन्ड खरीदेंगे। लेट मी एक्सप्लेन इट अगेन। एनएफयू का बॉन्ड है जो कि जिसका प्राइस हाई चल रहा है, जिसकी यील्ड भी लो है, क्यों? क्योंकि वो सेफर एंड लो रिस्क ऑप्शन है, तो फिर मोस्ट ऑफ द मनी वुड बी गोइंग टू द एनएफयू बॉन्ड, क्योंकि वो सेफ बॉन्ड है। भाई लोग बोलेंगे कि मेरे को 2 पैसा कम दे दे, पर मेरे को सेफ इन्वेस्टमेंट चाहिए, मेरे को पैसा डुबाना नहीं है। पर अब लेट से कोई बंदा है कि एक्स बंदा है कोई, या फिर वाई बंदा है कोई, ई बंदा है कोई, जी बंदा है, जो भी वी बंदा है, जो भी कोई बंदा है, what happens if they also like put bonds and they will say that like मैं 100 रुपए का बॉन्ड निकालता हूं और मैं 9 रुपए से ही दूंगा तुमको इंटरेस्ट, तो लोग बोलेंगे कि नहीं मेरे को तुम्हारा बॉन्ड नहीं चाहिए। एक तो तुम्हारा बॉन्ड उतना सेफ वर्दी नहीं है, दूसरी बात क्या है कि तुम्हारी यील्ड भी कम है, तो फिर तुमको अगर सेफर बॉन्ड चाहिए, अगर कोई बंदा एनएफयू से ज्यादा सेफ रहेगा तभी वो एनएफयू से कम ज्यादा प्राइस में ट्रेड हो रहा होगा, कम यील्ड पे ट्रेड हो रहा होगा। मोर द रिस्क मोर द यील्ड, व्हाई? बिकॉज देयर विल बी लोअर द प्राइस, बट if there is a higher risk it means that there is a lower demand, and it means that there is a lower price. I hope like you got this thing. So that's how the borrowing must be made cheaper if there is a high price and low yield. Similar is the case with like lesser yield would mean that there is a lesser return on interest, and that would mean that there is a easy availability of credit, क्योंकि कोई और एवेन्यूज बनेंगे ही नहीं, स्पेकुलेटिव वैल्यू ऑफ मनी जो रहेगी वो ऐसे रहेगी। ये कॉन्सेप्ट बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, एटलीस्ट लाइक एवरी ईयर और अल्टरनेट ईयर पे ये कॉन्सेप्ट पे क्वेश्चंस आते ही आते हैं कि बॉन्ड की फेस वैल्यू क्या रहती है, बॉन्ड की यील्ड क्या रहती है, बॉन्ड कैसे यील्ड प्राइस डिमांड इनका मैकेनिज्म फ्लो होता है। आई होप लाइक आई एम एबल टू कन्विंस इट। अब देखो, सिंस यू डू नो दैट इंक्रीज इन प्राइस लीड्स टू decrease in bond yield, and decrease in bond yield leads to easy credit. So if let's say a central bank start purchase of the bond, what it means that it actually creates a demand for the bonds, and demand for the bonds means that there is a increase in price of the bonds, and increase in the price of the bonds means that like what it means, there is a decrease in yield. So it means that interest rate decreases. And this decrease in interest rate would means that there is a increase in demand, increase in purchasing power, and there is a economic growth. It also means that since RBI is purchasing the bonds, it is infusing the money in the economy. It would also mean that monetary supply in the economy increases, aggregate demand increases, and there is a economic growth. And also it means that there is a positive market sentiment. Like I've talked about, money not only has the actual value, but it also has a speculative value. There is speculation related to it, there is a signaling to it, there is a price stability to it, perception to it, सब कुछ ये रहता ही है। तो ये sentiments जो है ना, since RBI is purchasing the bonds, people feel that the highest monetary authority is actually investing, is buying the bonds, it's buying the corporate debt as well. So they would feel that economy of that country, the markets of that country are reliable. Why? Because RBI is buying the debt now. If let's say they are unreliable, then RBI wouldn't be buying them. But since they are, only because they are reliable, RBI or the central government is purchasing them, it provides the positive market sentiment, and it actually provides for the impetus for the investment as well. So under the quantitative easing, central bank purchases bonds and financial assets from the banks and financial institutions for the predetermined period, with the purview of increasing the monetary supply, promoting the aggregate demand and producing the economic growth. Then reducing the bond yields by increasing the bond prices and making the credit available cheaper, thus promoting the investment, promoting the growth, and also creating the positive sentiments amongst the people. So here it is, like, central bank buys the bonds, bond prices increases, interest rate decreases, investment increases, and economic growth increases, the concept which I have talked about. The effect of quantitative easing on the developed economies is pretty much known. However, what its impact on the emerging economies is actually needs to be studied a bit. So the increase in the quantitative easing actually promotes the forex influx in the developed countries. So in the developing countries, in developing countries, how would it be? So if, let's say, someone is in America and he got cheaper credit, but since interest rate in America are very low, so he has the excess of money and he needs to find alternate investment opportunities. Since investment opportunities which are like of the limited risk in America are giving low yield, क्योंकि bond prices high है. So what it looks for other markets, other emerging opportunities, to ensure that the return on investment for them is the highest. So what they do is they tend to move to the emerging economies like India, and thereby they start investing via FPI, which is the foreign portfolio investment, and via FDI, which is like the foreign direct investment, leading to the forex inflow. And since there is a forex inflow in developed countries, uh, developing countries, it may mean that there is a currency appreciation. Why? If, let's say, people from USA want to invest in NFU, which is situated in India, they would have to go to RBI, they would have to exchange their dollars with the rupees, and those rupees, and they would be asking for rupees from the RBI to invest in NFU. So demand for rupees increases, demand for dollars decreases, and by that rupees they would give to me and Naman, so that like they are investing in NFU. So currency may appreciate in this case. However, people may say that, like, with the appreciation of currency, there can be a case of reduced exports. However, it is generally observed that exports are actually increased in this case. How exports are actually increased? Let's say in USA, there is a quantitative easing and there is a cheaper credit available. So there are cheaper money available. So they would be having greater demand. अब greater demand है तो फिर अब वो यूएसए के तो products खरीदेंगे ही, but there would be greater demand, greater market for the Indian products as well now, so they will ask for Indian products. So again, it's a interdependent thing, but it's generally been observed. So impact on the emerging economy must be well understood by you, and it can only be understood if you have the good command over whatever I talked in the earlier. So how the forex inflow increases? There is a cheaper credit, there is a more availability of dollar, and since the return on investment in the USA is low, why? Because there is a lower bond yield. So the money is looking for alternate investment opportunities, and the alternate investment opportunities are presented by the emerging economies. That's why the people would start to invest in emerging economies via FPIs, via FDIs. And this increase in forex interest may lead to appreciation of rupees, and additional purchasing power would actually create additional market and additional demand for the Indian products, or let's say developing countries products. So that would also mean there is an increase in exports from the countries as well. So in the developing countries like India, the impact would be like increase in foreign investments, increase in portfolio investment, increase in forex influence, and so on. However, like, there are issues with it as well. The issue in includes that the quantitative easing is not a permanent measure; it's an extraordinary measure, and it's like resorted only in cases where, like, the conventional instruments are not being in place. So like CRR, SLR, bank rates, swaps, etc., like instruments, when they are not working, then only central banks resort to such program of asset buying process, such program of asset purchase. And other thing is, you can say that like they have been resorted like in cases of extreme situations, like that of covid, like that of 2008 subprime crisis, and so on. Also, like when, so when once you have started the quantitative easing, you have started buying of the government and corporate bonds. The central banks are often questioned like when to withdraw them. So when the withdrawal happens, it often becomes a case of confusion. Case of withdrawal becomes case of confusion, case of like anxiety, case of unreliable perception, and so on. So what does, there would be like the unconsensus or disagreements between the actors in the central monetary authority about like how much to reduce, when to stop, how much to stop, when to continue, and so on. So the withdrawal of the uh, asset buying program itself becomes a cause of concern, which happened in 2023, 2024, whereby, which was called as taper tantrums, where the withdrawal of the US Fed from the asset buying program was often like questioned by the economists across the globe for their uncertainty, for the confusion, for the unreliability that they do, and so on. So this withdrawal, also called as a tapering of quantitative easing, and the taper tantrums associated with it, is the like most significant and most major drawback associated with it. Also, the quantitative easing is only prominent in case of developed countries, and not so great in terms of developing countries like India, is because the demand for money is already high in case of India. So uh, 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 if let's say we start the quantitative easing, and at some point if we would have to do the tapering and reduce the asset buying program of the RBI, then that would actually create significant havoc. Why? Because the economy itself wants the high amount of money as always. Why? Because we are a developing economy, we have like informal economy, we have rising middle class, we are rising consumerist, our industries, our economies, our MSMEs, our households need consistent, cheaper, and reliable credit. So in that case, tapering or like having and not having of the quantitative easing would be a bit challenging to manage overall. So what happens overall, the economies or monetary authorities of the developing countries like India don't resort to such programs. I hope like this is clear. uh, Here like we'll stop for this session. Tomorrow I'll be discussing about monetary policy framework in India, and what sort of instruments there exist in India with respect to the control of monetary policy. Please pay great attention to this concept of bonds, the concept of quantitative easing, how does credit creation works in India, what are different ways of functioning of monetary policy, because this area is like the poorest area of the economy, and at least 2 3 questions every year come from this area, or options from these concepts are in exam. uh, Understand the concept rather than like mugging them up, visualize the interlinkages, visualize the connections, visualize the elements and the flows that exist between the various actors of the economy to arrive at thinking by yourself. And if you have any doubt, any questions, please get back to me. I'm there to solve any query for yours. I hope like this is working for you, and just like internalize it, study it, discuss it, think it, ponder on it, and we'll be like continuing this tomorrow. Till then, I mean, all the best, and always Jai Hind. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to this third session of monetary policy discussions, where we are like focusing on building concepts, understanding the linkages, and ensuring that we are in comfortable position to actually know, understand, and decipher how the economic processes, transactions, phenomenon occur uh, between the players and amongst the systems of complex element that Indian, or let's say the world economy is. Last time, I think I have missed out on this discussion about the monetary policy transmission. So we'll first start with this. Then we'll talk about the monetary policy management framework in India, which is driven by the Monetary Policy Committee. And then I'll finish up things with the instruments by which the money supply and monetary policy and money supply is actually like done in the case of India. To begin with today's discussion, first understand what monetary policy transmission is, because there was this discussion in our group as well, whereby one of the candidates talked about how like M0, M1, M2 liquidity actually is present in there. So to give you a bit of discussion, the M0, which is like the liability of the Monetary Authority of India, which is like the RBI, does not always reflect into commensurate increase in the money supply across the actors which are present in the Indian economy. What are those actors? So एक तो सबसे पहले एक्टर है अपना आरबीआई, विच इज द मॉनेटरी अथॉरिटी ऑफ इंडिया, एंड इसकी जो लाइबिलिटी है वही M0 बनाता है, वही मनी सप्लाई बनाता है. फिर इसी के लाइबिलिटी से हम लोग बैंक्स के पास में जाते हैं, जो बैंक्स फिर उसके पास में कुछ आरडीआर रहता है, कुछ सीडीआर रहता है, जो भी कुछ रहता है, मतलब उसके पास में एक रेशियो रहता है, उसके पास में एक रहता है. अब ये अपनी क्रेडिट क्रिएशन कैपेसिटी से ये लोगों में क्रेडिट बनाता है. दिस इज हाउस होल्ड और दिस इज कॉर्पोरेट्स, और ये क्रेडिट बनाता है. एंड फिर अब इनके क्रेडिट बनाने से मनी सप्लाई डिसाइड होता है. दैट्स हाउ वी हैव टॉक्ड एन नंबर ऑफ टाइम्स. एंड I have also discussed that the credit creation capacity of banks actually depend upon what sort of assets they have, what is their quality of their balance sheets, then banking habit of the people, and so on. We have already discussed this. Another very central part of it is how does like the entire monetary policy transmission takes place in terms of policy measures that existed. पॉलिसी मेजर्स कौन से हैं वो मैं आज बताऊंगा, पर मैंने बताया भी हो कि भाई बैंक रेट्स है, सीआरआर है, एसएलआर है, रेपो ऑपरेशन है, ये सारे बैंक रेट्स ही है ना. तो इन बैंक रेट्स के सहारे कैसे ट्रांसमिशन हो रहा है, मतलब जैसे अगर आरबीआई ने कहा कि चलो आई एम डिक्रीजिंग योर बैंक रेट, आई एम डिक्रीजिंग योर रेपो, तो क्या एक्चुअल में इसी के कमेंसुरेट डिक्रीज इन कॉस्ट ऑफ बोरोइंग फॉर अ कंज्यूमर होता है क्या? तो ये जो होता है क्या, दिस इज कॉल्ड एज मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी ट्रांसमिशन. सो इट इज हाउ पॉलिसी एक्शंस ऑफ आरबीआई आर ट्रांसमिटेड अक्रॉस द सेगमेंट्स. RBI in economic survey and RBI governors, multiple RBI governors in the past have talked about the fact that monetary policy transmission in India, first it is poor and secondly it is delayed. पुअर का मतलब क्या है कि जो जिस कमेंसुरेट वे में डिक्रीज इन पॉलिसी रेट्स करते हैं या फिर इंक्रीज इन पॉलिसी रेट्स करते हैं, अभी डिक्रीज एंड इंक्रीज इन पॉलिसी रेट्स किस लिए चाहिए? टू मैनेज इन्फ्लेशन, या फिर टू मैनेज डिमांड, या फिर टू मैनेज ग्रोथ. If the highest controller of the credit, which is RBI, is not able to control the entire monetary supply, then its role becomes in question. And that has been the like a cause of concern for RBI and as well as for the economy of India, because the transmission is poor and transmission is delayed. Why the transmission is poor? Because there is a case of interest rate. So what is the interest rate? We know that like banks actually they take deposits at let's say 6% and then they lend at 10%. So the spread is often like the 4% is their profit, and for that profit banks की सारी मेहनत है. अब इसी में क्या है कि इसी में अगर जैसे मान लो कि अगर आपका डिपॉजिट रेट फिक्स है, डिपॉजिट में आपने एक बारी 7% पे 7.2% पर किसी का एफडी खुलवा लिया. अब क्या हुआ कि अब ये एफडी 6 साल के लिए है, तब पॉलिसी इंटरेस्ट रेट भी 10% के थे, तो फिर बैंक्स वेर हैविंग 10% माइनस 7.2%, विच इज लाइक कितना 2.8% का स्प्रेड था उसके पास में। बट अब क्या किया आरबीआई ने, ये जो लेंडिंग रेट है वो कम कर दिया। तो अगर लेंडिंग रेट कम किया तो फिर द क्रेडिट मस्ट गेट चीपर। तो बैंक्स के एसेट जिस रेट पे वो देते थे उनको चीपर करना पड़ेगा। अब वो 9% से 10% से अगर उन्होंने उसको 9% किया, तो पर बैंक्स को एफडी पे इंटरेस्ट तो 7.2 पे ही देना है। तो 9 माइनस 7.2 which is like 1.8 becomes their spread. So this spread gets decreased. So in case of India, the interest spread have been more rigid. तो दैट एक्चुअली मेक्स पुअर मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी ट्रांसमिशन पुअर। क्यों? जैसे मैंने अब अभी बताया कि बैंक्स के पास में ऑलरेडी डिपॉजिट रहते हैं, और उनको उन्हीं बेसिस पे अपनी लाइबिलिटीज को केटर करना पड़ता है, अपने लाइबिलिटीज को सर्विस करना पड़ता है। बट डिक्रीज इन पॉलिसी रेट वुड एक्चुअली लाइक रिड्यूस देयर स्प्रेड, and it actually makes them make impacts the profitability of lots. So that's why like they are not very eager to cut down on interest rate, not eager. Second is small savings scheme. अब जैसे let's say there is a post office, एंड पोस्ट ऑफिस में बहुत सारी आरडीज रहती है, फिर सुकन्या समृद्धि है, फिर किसान विकास पत्र है, फिर वो अटल पेंशन योजना है। अब ये सारी क्या है? स्मॉल सेविंग स्कीम्स है। स्मॉल क्यों? क्योंकि इनमें एक लिमिट रहता है, 10 लाख का, 20 लाख का, 30 लाख का, कुछ एक लिमिट रहता है, उसी के कमेंसुरेट आप सेविंग्स कर सकते हो। पर अब ये स्मॉल सेविंग स्कीम्स रहते हैं ना, इनके इंटरेस्ट रेट जो रहते हैं वो हायर रहते हैं। तो अगर इनके इंटरेस्ट रेट हायर है तो पीपल विथ सम डिपॉजिट ऑफ लेट्स से 10 लाख रुपीज, what they would do, they would rather invest in small saving schemes of post rather than depositing the same amount with the banks. तो अगर वो बैंक के साथ में डिपॉजिट नहीं कर रहे हैं तो बैंक्स के पास के डिपॉजिट्स कम हो रहे हैं, तो फिर उनके पास में अवेलेबिलिटी ऑफ फंड्स टू लेंड कम है। तो फिर उससे क्या होगा कि लेंडिंग रेट्स क्रेडिट कॉस्टलियर, lending rates increased. I hope like you are getting my point. Then again, next thing is bank do not borrow much from RBI. If let's say bank आरबीआई ने अपने पॉलिसी रेट्स कम किए, बट बैंक्स का लेंडिंग का और डिपॉजिट्स का वो पार्ट बहुत बड़ा है ही नहीं, तो फिर बैंक्स के लेंडिंग कैपेसिटी पे और बोरोइंग कैपेसिटी पे उनको बहुत ज्यादा इंपैक्ट पड़ता नहीं है। तो इस केस में भले ही वो मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी चीपर करे या मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी कॉस्टलियर करे, वो फर्क नहीं पड़ता। तो मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी ट्रांसमिशन पुअर होता है। नेक्स्ट इज एसेट क्वालिटी। अब हाउ डज एसेट क्वालिटी प्ले इनटू द डिस्कशन? So if let's say that there are NPAs with the bank, then banks are a bit hesitant to lend. So even if there is a cheaper credit, banks would make more scrutiny, more the deliberations, more due diligences while giving the credit. This actually like decreases overall supply of credit. And the delay is because why? The overall actions, overall economic factors, overall transmissions are actually slowed because of these factors. Why? Because the transmission is poor and transmission delayed. Why? Because I mean the banking habits are limited, the asset quality is poor, the interest rate does not guarantee like immediate and effective transmission of monetary policy. I'm sorry, the breaks in between would be the thing where I go and get a sip of water. So please don't get irritated by it and just don't lose your patience. And मतलब भाई अब वीडियो बंद ही कर मत देना। अब हूँ मैं यहीं पे हूँ, सब कुछ बता के ही जाऊंगा, बिना बताए कुछ भी नहीं जाऊंगा। और भाई अब इतनी मेहनत कर रही है तो थोड़ा सा, गर्मी भी इतनी है तो फिर पानी तो पीना ही पड़ता है, वो तो आपको भी पता ही है। तो चलो मैं क्या कह रहा था कि डिले इज बिकॉज देयर इज अ सिग्निफिकेंट इनफॉर्मल इकोनॉमी एस्पेक्ट एज वेल। अब मैं यहाँ पे ब्लैक यूज नहीं कर रहा डेलिबरेटली। व्हाई? बिकॉज ब्लैक डजंट नेसेसरीली मीन कि सारा का सारा इनफॉर्मल ब्लैक ही है। इनफॉर्मल का पार्ट ब्लैक है कि जो डिक्लेयर्ड एज इनकम नहीं है, बट कुछ एक्चुअल में इनफॉर्मल ही है, अनऑर्गेनाइज्ड है, आउटसाइड द एम्बिट्स है। तो ये होने की वजह से भी डिले है। And most important aspect is there is a imported inflation in India driven by oils, driven by pulses, driven by the critical resources अब जैसे एपीआईज फॉर फार्मा है, जैसे कि क्रिटिकल मिनरल्स है, तो फिर उसके बाद में प्रोटीन इन्फ्लेशन इन इंडिया है कि कैसे प्रोटीन इन्फ्लेशन, फूड में भी ग्रेन्स के रेट्स नहीं बढ़ते हैं पर प्रोटीन के जैसे कि मिल्क का, जैसे कि पल्सेस का, फिर उसी के बाद में फैट इन्फ्लेशन है इंडिया में, ऑयल्स के रेट बढ़ रहे हैं, अब वो एडिबल ऑयल है या फिर अब वो क्रूड ऑयल है। तो इन सब के केस में इंपोर्टेड इन्फ्लेशन की वजह से व्हाट हैपेंस, द मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी ट्रांसमिशन इजंट वेरी इफेक्टिव। What I mean by it, so if let's say RBI increases the policy rates amidst increasing inflation, then it wouldn't be of very significance. Why? Because the inflation is supply led, not the demand led. So even if like you decrease the demand, but the inflation wouldn't reduce. Why? Because the actual price of the good at its origin has higher price, because why, it's imported. अब देखो इसी डिस्कशन से इंपोर्टेड इन्फ्लेशन है एंड मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी ट्रांसमिशन पुअर है, मेंस में भी 2 बार क्वेश्चन आ चुका है, एंड इवन आईएफओएस मेंस में भी 1 बार क्वेश्चन आ चुका है, आई थिंक 2024 में था ये। तो अंडरस्टैंड दिस कॉन्सेप्ट वेरी वेल दैट देयर इज अ इंपोर्टेड inflation, and monetary policy in India is not so effective. Why? Because it's poor, it's delayed, and it's not able to contour and conquer the imported inflation wala aspect. I hope like this discussion is very clear with you. To actually address the monetary policy transmission and to have like what you can say effective monetary policy in India, there came a monetary policy reforms which were driven by the Urjit Patel Committee in 2015, जो सबसे सबसे कॉमन है, and it actually established to review and strengthen monetary policy framework in India. What they did is they actually submitted set of recommendations. First recommendation was that put CPI as a nominal anchor rather than WPI. अब WPI से क्या रहेगा कि even though like it's good for the fact that ये wholesale price include करता है, taxes and subsidies को include नहीं करता है, but that wasn't giving the clearer picture, no clearer picture of the inflation. खैर सीपीआई के भी अपने ड्रॉबैक्स है, वो हम लोग डिस्कस करेंगे जब इन्फ्लेशन और इंडाइसेस डिस्कस करेंगे तब। पर मेन थिंग इज उसने सर्विसेज, सीपीआई में सर्विसेज इंक्लूड होती है और ये कंज्यूमर्स पे इंपैक्ट बताता है। एट द सेम टाइम डब्ल्यूपीआई जो है वो केवल गुड्स बताता है और वो केवल प्रोड्यूसर्स पे के ऊपर इंपैक्ट बताता है। तो फिर सीपीआई कंबाइंड, सीपीआई के भी मल्टीपल वो है, पर सीपीआई कंबाइंड was put in as a nominal anchor for the inflation addressing. Then also it focuses on like they talked about the fact that how to actually, I mean, what should be the basis for RBI's monetary policy actions. So Urjit Patel committee recommendation said that inflation targeting should be the basis. Rather, I should go for the cleaner slides. Should be the clearer and only basis for monetary policy. So that's why like they have 4% plus minus 2 as a the target band, and at that time when the committee came in, inflation was quite high. At was that was around the 10%. So they asked to shift from 10% to 6%. And they also said that RBI should adopt a flexible inflation targeting policy, and that was given with respect to the tolerance band that have. And also like they said that monetary policy should be reviewed at a bi-monthly intervals instead of quarterly intervals. Before that there was this quarterly intervention, and that too was like there wasn't any specific mandate to do it, but with the recommendations they advocated for a mandate for it, which was a landmark shift in the inflation management. And also RBI, they advocated for the introduction of spectrum of long-term repo operations to manage the liquidity. I'll be discussing this long-term operations today itself. Then also it talked about the fiscal policies, and most important thing with respect to it is formation of a monetary policy monetary policy framework. and formation of monetary policy committee. So on the basis of these recommendations, there came into picture the most significant committee, the most significant development with respect to the monetary policy is the formation of monetary policy committee. So it was focused on the Urjit Patel committee recommendation, whereby inflation targeting was the focus, and to ensure that there is a transparency and accountability in the monetary policy framework and management. And also it wanted to have views of both government and RBI to ensure that there is a equal saying and consensus based decision making. However, though we will discuss that actually the decisions are taken by the voting, and RBI governors has a casting vote in case of tie, but the members appointed by government and members appointed by RBI both are there, and it gives in an excellent way to have a wider perspective and diverse views on the monetary policy. Why? Because there is this monetary policy dilemma which we talked about in the last session, whereby like the competing views of growth versus inflation were there, and we would know that like RBI wants to curtail the inflation, whereas at the same time government wants to push for the growth. So the diverse views, diverse perspective become quite uh, progressive to have that in the structural framework. It also reduces pressure on RBI governor in policy decisions. Why? Because he is aided, not really aided, but he is actually a part of the larger monetary policy committee rather than him being the sole guide to the him being sole guide to the monetary policy decisions in India. And most important thing was, since the both government and the RBI are there, there can be synergy and coordination between the monetary policy, which is like the how to control the monetary framework in India, and there is a fiscal policy about the budgeting, about the government expenditure, and so on. So this coordination can actually have make our economy systematized in a way of handling the dilemma between growth and inflation excellently. The monetary policy actually has a total number of 6 members, out of which three are from the RBI, three are from RBI, and three external members are nominated by Government of India on the recommendations of a committee headed by Cabinet Secretary, and they are appointed for the term of 4 years, and they are not eligible for the reappointment. Another thing I want you to know is monetary policy committee is a statutory body, and it gets its legal authority from the RBI Act of 1934. External members nominated by the Government of India, and uh, act, in actuality each member has one vote, whereas like the RBI governor has a casting vote. So RBI governor has a casting vote in case of tie, but he doesn't have a veto. Also all decisions are taken by the majority voting, and in case of tie, RBI as a governor has a casting vote, and minutes of meeting of the monetary policy committee are published after 14 days. And also member can express their views in written statements to improve like there is a transparency and there is a accountability. It also mandates that MPC should meet at least 4 times a year, but in present status, in reality, in current status, they meet 6 times a year. So once in 2 months, they actually do it. So, and the basis for the monetary policy committee's monetary policy framework agreement, which was signed between the Government of India and the RBI, and it amended the RBI Act 1934 into 200 in 2016, to give effect to and a legal backing to the monetary policy framework that exists in India. The primary basis, so the monetary policy status in India is currently, like I've talked about, single objective, which is like the inflation targeting, single target, which is managing inflation between 4 plus minus 2, and then single instrument, which is controlling the repo rate. nothing else. So it's the primary objective is the price stability while keeping in mind the economic growth, and this is known as flexible inflation targeting between the 4 plus minus 2 percentage of the tolerance. Then inflation target is decided by the government in consultation with RBI once every 5 years, and role of a monetary policy committee is to fix the policy rates, fix policy rates to actually maintain the inflation in this band. And also a policy rate is defined in the RBI Act, means repo rate. So the policy rates actually in the RBI Act, they are repo rate, uh, repo rate to achieve the target. Here policy rate to report to achieve the target. RBI also should publish the monetary policy report explaining the sources of inflation and inflation forecast. And in, let's say, for the 3 consecutive quarters, if RBI fails to maintain the inflation in 4 plus minus 2 bandwidth, then it should submit a report to the government explaining the reasons for failure, actions that are being taken, and time period required to achieve the target again. uh, uh, and the one of the most important aspect of it is it enhances the credibility of government and RBI's commitment towards the inflation control. It also streamlines the entire monetary policy transmission, monetary policy commitments, monetary policy frameworks, because the confusion is done away. Now we only need to look for the CPI combined, we only need to look for the repo rates, and we only need to look for the inflations. These are the only things that we need to look for when we are about to herald into the monetary policy discussions. And it actually like reduces the complexity of the complex systems that Indian economy or any economy is. And also it brings in the accountability of central bank. Why? Because there are reports that they need to give. There are ways to there are reports, there are ways to explain the measures. Then also that like they need to give out what they have did and what they hadn't, like here reasons for failure, remedial measures. Then if then there is a monetary policy report which RBI must give in to talk about sources of inflation and inflation forecast in next 6 to 18 months. And also like it reduces this scope of political pressure on central banks to make decisions regarding the interest rate. Why? Because the government and politics of the country wants the interest rate to be low because it promotes the growth, it promotes the cheaper credit, it promotes the demand. However, it comes with like pent up demand, and it may lead to hottening of the economy, it may lead to the inflation and so on. But for the larger macroeconomic stability, there must be a suitable commitment of the government towards the developmental measures and suitable commitment of uh, the central bank towards the like growth targets. So both of these coming on the same platform, discussing and deliberating, having a backing of the legal aspect and having a framework within the RBI Act ensures that there is a great synergy, great team spirit between the two. However, the uh, the experts or the critics of the monetary policy committee argue that single objective, single focus, single target perspective may lead to compromising on the cases of the employment, cases on the economic growth, cases on the forex management and so on. Because like the money is also related to employment, money is also related to economic growth, and money also related to forex management. So that can be the question. Also, like I have told you, the monetary policy committee and monetary policy framework doesn't make much of a sense when there is a when there is a inflation which is supply side. Inflation is supply side, and when the inflation is actually what, it's imported. So in that case, the if the overall effectivity of the monetary policy comes into question. And also excessive focus on inflation may lead to reduced demand, may lead to like reduced economic growth, may lead to increase in cost of credit, and thus a decrease in purchasing power, and so on. I mean, so all of these discussions, all of these give and take, which are, which have we talked about a lot till now, and also which is like central theme in the monetary policy dilemma, are persistent. But the major and foremost thing that actually is a challenge for the monetary policy committee and entire monetary policy framework in India is this thing: the supply side inflation, the fragmented supply chains. So like take the case of agriculture markets. Agriculture markets in India are quite fragmented, and they are often like divided into various states, driven by the APMC markets that existed. So in that case, and lack of like a national supply chain driven by a national market uh, leads to significant cases of food inflation, particularly the vegetable, protein, and the dairy inflation, that actually hamper the common man. And again, the case of imported inflation. So there is a like data that if the oil increases by $10 per barrel, the CPI in India increases by like close to 0.64. So this CPI of 0.64, you can understand now, with the wars going on, with the uh, 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 Middle East like facing the heat of the war, and then oil reserves and the gas reserves feast, facing the heat from the attacks of the drones. The imported inflation is set to become major challenge in the next few months to come if the war doesn't like get handled and negotiated well. Why I'm discussing this? Because the monetary policy and relationship of it with the inflation has been asked two times in mains, like I have talked to you. And for that, you need to know this nuance of the imported and supply side inflation. Normally, what would do, you would know that हाँ हाँ RBI कर सकता है क्या मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी से, हाँ हाँ RBI कर सकता है, कैसे करेगा, रेपो रेट कम करो, बैंक रेट, रेपो रेट बढ़ाओ, बैंक रेट बढ़ाओ, रिजर्व रेपो बढ़ाओ, एलएफ महंगा करो, वो सब कुछ तो पता ही है। पर बात क्या है कि यू आर नॉट गिविंग इन द एक्चुअल पिक्चर। तुम एक्चुअल चीज तो उसको बता ही नहीं रहे, जो चल रहा है वो तुमको उसको बता ही नहीं रहे। चल क्या रहा है कि सप्लाई साइड फ्रैगमेंटेड मार्केट्स है, फ्रैगमेंटेड सप्लाई चेन्स है, दी प्राइस डिस्कवरी पुअर है, एंड ऑल्सो इंपोर्टेड इन्फ्लेशन है। तो इन दो केसेस में क्वेश्चन ऑफ मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी मैनेजमेंट, क्वेश्चन ऑफ मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी फ्रेमवर्क मतलब बहुत ही चैलेंजिंग है। तो आई होप लाइक दिस इज क्लियर फॉर यू। तो कंक्लूजन क्या है कि भैया हमारे पास ना इन्फ्लेशन टारगेटिंग जो है वो सप्लाई साइड रहता है, एंड केवल मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी से सॉल्व नहीं हो सकता है। यू नीड टू फोकस ऑन द सप्लाई साइड थिंग्स, you need to improve the discovery markets, you need to improve the supply chains, you need to have the measures like the Essential Commodities Act to ensure that like there is no hoarding, there is no profiteering by creating artificial scarcity. तो इंडिया में क्या है ना कि इंडिया में जो फ्लेक्सिबल इन्फ्लेशन टारगेटिंग करी है इंस्टेड ऑफ स्ट्रिक्ट इन्फ्लेशन टारगेटिंग, विच इज एक्चुअली गुड थिंग, क्योंकि हमने +-2% का टॉलरेंस ऑलरेडी दिया हुआ है, एंड दैट टू फॉर द 3 क्वार्टर्स, एक दो क्वार्टर में तो चलता भी है। तो इस केस में इंडियाज अप्रोच सीम्स टू बी क्वाइट द गुड in paper, in principle, in the like theory, but the practicality is like cause of concern with the imported inflation and with the supply side factors. Moving forward, we'll be talking about like the what are instruments by which instruments of monetary policy management, or the how does the money supply management. So before moving that, I want you to understand the concept of discounting. So what does discounting means? So let's say there is something called as bill of exchange. What is bill of exchange? Bill of exchange is a written document that assures payment of money by purchaser to the seller for a goods purchased or the services delivered at a future date. So what it is, फिर से एक बार बताता हूँ। ये एक रिटर्न डॉक्यूमेंट है गिवन बाय द buyer to the seller in exchange of goods and services that they purchased. एंड इस रिटर्न डॉक्यूमेंट में क्या क्या रहेगी थी? इस रिटर्न डॉक्यूमेंट में देयर इज अ कमिटमेंट एंड ऑब्लिगेशन टू गिव मनी एट फ्यूचर प्राइस. सो लेट्स से हम लोग एनएफयू में हैं और तुम लोग कौन है? तुम लोग है हमारा बायर. तो तुम लोग को एनएफयू से चाहिए एक मस्त करारी करारी सी थार. तो तुम मेरे पास आए, तुमने मेरे को बोला कि निखिल भाई एक काम करिए, मेरे को थार चाहिए, आप दीजिए. तो फिर मैंने तुम्हें थार दे दी. तुम्हारे पास में अभी पैसा नहीं था. तुमने क्या बोला कि ये आप मेरे से बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज ले लो, कि जिसमें मैं आपको, आज क्या है, आज तारीख जो मतलब 10 मार्च है, तो मैं आपको 31 ऑफ मार्च को इसके जो भी 18 लाख बनेंगे, 20 लाख बनेंगे, वो आपको दूंगा. तो फिर अब ये बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज बनाए. तो अब इस बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज पे अब एनएफयू के पास आए. अब तो एनएफयू के पास में क्या है? एनएफयू ने तो थार तो दे दी, पर एनएफयू के पास में अब 31 मार्च को मैच्योर होने वाला 20 लाख रुपए का एक बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज है. पर अब क्या हुआ कि आ गई तारीख 20 ऑफ मार्च. 20 ऑफ मार्च को एनएफयू में नमन को देना है एक मस्त सा आईफोन. तो नमन क्या बोलेगा कि नमन को चाहिए 2 लाख रुपए. तो नमन को पर 20 तारीख को ही लेना है. तो नमन क्या बोलेगा कि भैया मेरे पास में 31 ऑफ मार्च का तो बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज है, पर मैं 11 दिन नहीं रुक सकता, मेरे को आज ही पैसा चाहिए. तो नमन क्या करेगा? ये बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज लेके किसी के पास जाएगा, फिर वहां पे उस बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज को डिस्काउंट करेगा. सो डिस्काउंटिंग इज व्हाट? डिस्काउंटिंग इज कन्वर्जन ऑफ मनी, बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज टू द मनी एट अ डेट अर्लियर देन मेंशन्ड. तो क्या होता है कि नमन जो 20 लाख रुपए का मिलने वाला था, कितने 31 मार्च को, नमन 20 तारीख को ही वो एक एजेंट के पास जाता है या फिर किसी बैंक के पास जाता है. अब लेट्स से बैंक के पास ही जाता है. बैंक को बोलता है कि मेरे पास में 31 ऑफ मार्च का 20 लाख रुपए का बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज है, पर मुझे आज ही पैसा चाहिए क्योंकि मुझे 2 लाख रुपए का आईफोन लेना है. आप मेरे से बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज दे दो और मेरे को एक आपसे कुछ वो ले लो, मेरे को अभी पैसा दे दो. तो बैंक क्या करेगी? बैंक नमन से वो बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज लेगी 31 मार्च का 20 लाख रुपए का, और नमन को 20 तारीख को ही उसके 19 लाख रुपए देगी. वाई? बिकॉज उसने डिस्काउंट किया, उसको ये 11 दिन एक्स्ट्रा वो बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज उसके पास रखना पड़ेगा ना. तो दिस प्रोसेस ऑफ गिविंग लेसर अमाउंट ऑफ मनी, तो 20 लाख के बदले उसको 19 लाख दिया, तो फिर कितना? 1 लाख रुपए का डिस्काउंट मिला, जो कि कितना है? 1 लाख अपॉन 20 लाख, 5% का डिस्काउंट मिला. तो फिर 5% जो बना वो डिस्काउंटिंग रेट बना. और डिस्काउंटिंग इज प्रोसेस की जब ये बिल को ये जो ये रहता है, क्या बोलते हैं उसको, बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज, उसको अर्लियर डेट पे मनी पे कन्वर्ट करना. तो जनरली क्या होता है कि बैंक्स रहते हैं, बैंक्स दे हैव सच बिल्स ऑफ एक्सचेंज, दे हैव सर्टेन सिक्योरिटीज, और वो सब कुछ है. अब नमन ने तो आईसीआईसी को पैसे दिए थे क्योंकि उसने उसको आईफोन लेना था, तो फिर उसने उसका बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज डिस्काउंट करवाया. अब क्या हुआ कि आरबीआई को भी 25 मार्च को किसी को लैंडिंग करनी थी, तो फिर उसके पास में उसको लैंडिंग करनी थी 20 लाख रुपए की, उसके पास में थे अभी 50,000 रुपए ही. तो फिर व्हाट दे वांटेड टू डू? दे वांटेड टू अरेंज 9.5 लाख फ्रॉम समवेयर. तो 19.5 लाख फ्रॉम देयर. सो व्हाट दे डू इज बैंक्स, आईसीआईसीआई गोज टू आरबीआई एंड आस्क देम फॉर द 19.5 लाख. तो आरबीआई बोलती है कि जो शुरुआत में जो बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज था वो आप मेरे को दे दो, मैं 31 मार्च को उसका 20 लाख रुपया करूंगा, पर मैं अभी आपको उसको डिस्काउंट 19.5% पे ही कर सकता हूं. तो फिर 5% अपॉन 19.5 इंटू 100 ये जो बनता है, 0.5 इंटू मतलब जो है, तो यही अपना डिस्काउंटिंग रेट है. तो बैंक रेट वो होता है कि रेट एट विच आरबीआई डिस्काउंट्स फर्स्ट क्लास बिल्स ऑफ एक्सचेंज. अब फर्स्ट क्लास मतलब कौन सी? भाई जो सबसे अच्छे, मतलब अब कोई एक बंदा है भाई जो खुद जिसके पास में खुद के पास ही पैसे नहीं है, अब वो किसी को उधारी से पैसे लेता है और उसको बिल्स ऑफ एक्सचेंज देता है, तो फिर अब 31 मार्च पे वो उसका बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज एनकैश होगा ही, इसकी कोई कम गारंटी है। पर अगर वही कोई बड़ा आदमी है, जैसे एनएफयू है, एनएफयू ने कोई बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज दिया, तो फिर एनएफयू का बिल्स ऑफ एक्सचेंज ट्रस्टवर्दी रहेगा, तो फिर फर्स्ट क्लास में माना जाएगा। तो जनरली ये जो बैंक रेट रहता है ना, कि जिस रेट एट विच बैंक्स आरबीआई डिस्काउंट्स फर्स्ट क्लास बिल्स ऑफ एक्सचेंज फ्रॉम बैंक्स इज कॉल्ड एज बैंक रेट. I hope like this concept of discounting is clear for you, because why? This discounting rate and this bank rate actually handles the entire monetary policy money supply. Of course all instruments are there, but अगर आपको discounting वाला फंडा पता चल गया, तो फिर आगे के कंसेप्ट जैसे जी सेक्स है, ट्री बिल्स है, रेपो ऑपरेशंस है, सारे ऑपरेशंस आपको इजी लगेंगे. Let me explain it one more time. The bill of exchange is actually a written document that assures payment of money by purchaser to the seller for the goods purchased, and that actually like the done at a future date. Discounting is a process that converts this bill of exchange in the money earlier than mentioned on the bill of exchange, and all of this happens, discounting happens at a rate whereby the conversion of money takes place at lesser value than of the bill of exchange. And बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज की जो वैल्यू है एंड एक्चुअल वैल्यू जो मिलती है कन्वर्जन ऑफ मनी में, वो डिस्काउंटिंग रेट कहलाता है. एंड व्हाट हैपेंस व्हेन देयर इज अ बायर, then it gives bill of exchange to the seller, then seller goes to this bank and bank goes to this RBI. So the rate at which RBI discounts banks bill of exchange, which are of the first class, is actually called as bank rate. And since what happens, banks get money by discounting bills of exchange, and these money is actually used for lending, these money is actually used for creating demand, these money is used for the credit creation. If let's say what happens, बैंक के पास में अभी एक बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज है जो कि 1000 रुपए का है, वो आरबीआई के पास गया, आरबीआई उसको बोली कि ये बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज जो है मैं अभी उसके 900 रुपया दूंगा, मतलब जो भी है, तो उसके पास में एक्चुअल में 900 रुपया ही आया, तो फिर अब वो 900 में से लेट्स से 800 रुपया ही लेंड कर सकता है. बट व्हाट हैपेंस, सो अभी डिस्काउंटिंग कितना हुआ, ग्रेटर देन 10% का हुआ, और लेट्स से 10% का हुआ. बट व्हाट विल हैपन, आरबीआई बोले कि रादर देन 900 रुपीज दूंगी, मैं तुम्हें 950 रुपीज दूंगी, तो फिर बैंक्स वुड हैव इंस्टेंट ऑफ मेकिंग 800 रुपीज as a lend, they will give greater than 800 रुपीज, लेट्स से 870 रुपीज देगा वो. तो ये 870 रुपीज जो है ना, तो फिर अब 70 रुपए से मनी फ्लो बढ़ाना है एक अपनी ओवरऑल इकोनॉमी में, अपनी ओवरऑल मनी एग्रीगेट्स में. सो दिस 80 रुपीज इंक्रीज जो है ना, वो एक्चुअल में इंक्रीज इन मनी सप्लाई है, एक्चुअल में इंक्रीज इन परचेसिंग पावर है. सो दैट्स व्हाई लाइक द हायर बैंक रेट्स would mean that there is a larger discounting, and lower bank rates means there is a lower discounting. So lower discounting means higher money supply. I hope like this is clear for you. उसी के बाद में अब इसी बेसिस पे मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी चलती है. कैसे कि हाउस होल्ड्स है, कॉर्पोरेट्स है, इंस्टेड ऑफ बिल्स ऑफ एक्सचेंज, नाउ दे हैव द मनी, एंड व्हाट दे डू इज दे टेक दिस मनी एंड दे डिपॉजिट इट विद बैंक्स. So banks, what they would do, either they would deposit it with RBI for SLR, for CRR, for the other swaps and other things, and also they will take loans from the RBI via repo operations, via the LAF operations, via the MSF operations, to meet their liquidity needs, to meet like their assets and balance sheets and so on. तो बैंक्स क्या करेंगे कि अब इन लोन्स को लेके, इन डिपॉजिट्स को लेके लेंड करेंगे, किनको, आरबीआई को लेंड करेंगे, और हाउस होल्ड और कंज्यूमर को लेंड करेंगे. हाउस होल्ड और कंज्यूमर को लेंड करने का रेट जितना कम रहेगा, उतना ही चीपर क्रेडिट रहेगा, उतना ही मोर अवेलेबिलिटी ऑफ क्रेडिट रहेगा, उतना ही इंक्रीज मनी सप्लाई रहेगा. तो रेट ऑफ डिपॉजिट्स जो रहते हैं या फिर रेट ऑफ लेंडिंग जो रहते हैं, इसी से कॉस्ट ऑफ लेंडिंग एंड बोरोइंग डिसाइड होता है, इसी से मनी सप्लाई वैरी होता है, इसी से एग्रीगेट डिमांड वैरी होती है, इसी से इन्फ्लेशन वैरी होता है. सो दैट इज द एंटायर प्रोसेस ऑफ मनी सप्लाई. मतलब पहले भी हम लोग ये बहुत बार डिस्कस कर चुके हैं, जस्ट आई वांटेड टू पुट इन कि कैसे होता है फिर से एक बारी. तो ये मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी कंट्रोल करने के या फिर ये कंट्रोल करने के दो तरीके हैं. RBI does it with the help of quantitative measures and with the help of qualitative measures. Quantitative measures का मतलब क्या है कि ये ओवरऑल फ्लो एंड वॉल्यूम ऑफ द मनी रेगुलेट करते हैं. हियर quantitative measures do quantitative measures do not discriminate between the do not discriminate between the sectors. तो अगर क्वांटिटेटिव मेजर से अगर हम लोगों ने मनी सप्लाई बढ़ाया तो फिर अक्रॉस द इकोनॉमी मनी सप्लाई बढ़ेगा, हम लोगों ने कम किया तो फिर अक्रॉस द इकोनॉमी कम करेगा. पर वही क्वालिटेटिव जो रहता है ना, वो सिलेक्टिव रेट रहता है. इससे स्पेसिफिक सेक्टर्स पे मनी सप्लाई बढ़ेगा, स्पेसिफिक सेक्टर्स पे मनी सप्लाई कम होगा. वो कैसे करेगा? आरबीआई बोलेगी कि भैया सोलर हाउस होल्ड सोलर पावर प्लांट्स के लिए ही जो लोन दिए जाएंगे, उसी पर एक क्रेडिट इंटरेस्ट जो है वो कम करना है तुमको, उसी पे आपको लेंडिंग बढ़ानी है, ऐसा बैंक्स को बोलेगी. सिमिलर इज द केस विद प्रायोरिटी सेक्टर लेंडिंग. बैंक्स बोलेगी कि आपको 6 7 8 सेक्टर जो भी है उन पे आपको लेंडिंग बढ़ानी है. तो फिर अगर आप उस पे लेंडिंग नहीं बढ़ाओगे तो फिर आपको ये पेनल्टी देना पड़ेगा. तो उस केस में एक स्पेसिफिक क्वालिटेटिव बेस्ड मेजर्स लिए जाते हैं मनी सप्लाई बढ़ाने या फिर कम करने के लिए. तो ये क्वालिटेटिव मेजर्स है और एक क्वांटिटेटिव मेजर्स है. एंड जनरली both of these things are driven by RBI. Why? Because RBI is the controller of credit in India. Controller of credit. When we'll discuss RBI, हम सारे functions उसके देख लेंगे, but it actually controls the money supply, it controls the lending, it controls the borrowing, and it so does by various like qualitative and quantitative measures. फिर उसमें भी कुछ कन्वेंशनल मेजर्स है, कुछ अनकन्वेंशनल मेजर्स है. ये क्वांटिटेटिव में कन्वेंशनल मेजर्स क्या है कि वो है बैंक रेट, ओपन मार्केट ऑपरेशंस, वेरिएबल रिजर्व रेशियोज जो सीआरआर एसएलआर है. फिर अनकन्वेंशनल में तो हमने देखा ही था कि क्वांटिटेटिव ईजिंग थी, मार्जिनल स्टैंडिंग फैसिलिटी थी, मार्केट सप्लाई स्कीम थी एंड सो ऑन. अब ये बात क्या है कि हर एक इंस्ट्रूमेंट काम वैसे ही करता है, बस आपको थोड़े मोड़े डिटेल्स पता हो कि कैसे उनकी डिटेल्स है. Here I'll be trying to give you concept aspect of it, and जब कुछ पीओ नोट्स टाइप देना रहेगा तो फिर मैं इनके स्पेसिफिक टेबल्स वगैरह भी तुमको दे ही दूंगा. अभी बस उसका प्रोसेस, उसका अंडरस्टैंडिंग, उसका लिंकेजेस समझो क्योंकि वो बहुत जरूरी है. लेट्स स्टार्ट विद द क्वांटिटेटिव मेजर्स एंड लेट्स स्टार्ट विद द व्हाट यू कैन से द कन्वेंशनल मेजर्स. कन्वेंशनल में हम लोगों ने सबसे पहले तो बैंक रेट तो हमने देख लिया कि कैसे बैंक रेट से होता है, ये यहाँ पे मैं वो डिस्कस कर चुका हूं कि बिल्स ऑफ एक्सचेंज जब डिस्काउंटिंग होती है तो उस हिसाब से अगर लोअर डिस्काउंटिंग रेट है तो फिर हायर मनी सप्लाई रहेगा, अगर हायर बैंक रेट है, हायर रेट ऑफ डिस्काउंट है तो फिर कम बैंक सप्लाई रहेगा. तो उसी में देयर इज समथिंग कॉल्ड एज the CRR and SLRs, which are often called as variable supply. यहाँ पे मैंने लिखा है, they are called as variable reserve ratios. तो उसमें one is CRR, which is also called as like the cash reserve ratio. तो ये क्या है? It is the percentage of total deposits. They may be like the net demand and time liabilities which banks have to keep with RBI in cash at any point of time. Also like I think by slip of tongue मैंने सेशन 1 में ये कहा था कि सीआरआर जो रहता है वो बैंक्स को उनके खुद के पास में रखना पड़ता है. तो फिर वो मेरे से स्लिप ऑफ टंग था, वो मिस्टेक था. Banks need to keep the cash reserves with RBI, and also it's part of the like it's some part of their net demand and time liabilities. Most importantly, like earlier there was a ceiling on कि इसी फिक्स बैंक के बीच में CRR और SLR होना चाहिए था, पर अभी वो है नहीं. In 2006 with the RBI amendment, the ceiling has been removed away. So CRR actually is the cash reserve upon the net time and demand liability. So it is what it's the uh, total percentage of the net time and demand deposits that uh, banks have to keep with the RBI in the form of cash, and it's particularly done to protect them from lending excessively, to ensure that like banks have a certain reserve of cash in case like the deposit too much of a withdrawal from the deposit takes into them. Also it protects them from being in a position whereby there is a scarcity of liquidity and so on. I mean it's way by which they actually control the entire monetary policy in the economy, and also the stability, the liquidity, the risk assessment, the balance sheet of the banks as well. Yeah. So what happens if, let's say, there are 100 rupees of deposits with the I'll like use the other one so that my handouts are cleaner for you. So if, let's say, there is 100 rupees deposits, NDTL, net demand and type liabilities with the bank, which are like the deposits with bank. So what they want to do, they want to monetize it, and they want to earn interest from the assets. So what they would do, they would want to lend part of it. अब लेट्स से CRR अगर 10% का है, तो फिर दे कैन ओनली लेंड 90 rupees. Why? Because 10 rupees, 10% of the 100, which is 10 rupees, have to keep them with the RBI for the like the liquidity purpose, the cash reserve purpose, and they can only lend the 90 rupees. In other case, when let's say the CRR is, let's say, 5%, then what they would do, CRR come hua, so they would have to only give 5 rupees with the RBI, and they can actually lend 95 rupees. तो ये जो तो अब क्या हुआ कि 90 से 95 क्या हुआ कि 5 रुपीस का जो लेंडिंग पावर है वो बैंक्स का बढ़ा, फिर 5 रुपए से क्रेडिट भी बढ़ा, तो फिर बैंक्स वुड हैव लार्जर रिसोर्सेस एट देयर डिस्पोजल. तो फिर जो पहले जो केवल बेस्ट ऑफ द बेस्ट को ही वो लेंडिंग कर रहे थे, अब वो थोड़ा सा कम सेफ वाले को भी लेंडिंग करेंगे. So what it does, CRR, with the CRR increase, credit creation capacity of the banks decreases, money multiplier decreases, money supply decreases. So it results in decrease in aggregate demand, price level, and economic growth. Also profitability of the banks decreases with CRR increase. Why? Because जैसे CRR के ऊपर there is CRR में उनको बैंक्स के पास में कैश ही रखना पड़ेगा, तो फिर उस इसके ऊपर उनको कुछ इंटरेस्ट नहीं मिलता है. Banks don't get that interest on any part of cash reserve that they keep with RBI. But if the same amount of money, if they would have been lending, then they would get interest for it. They would get income from it. So with increase in CRR, the profitability of the banks also decreases. Then additionally, there is a SLR also. It's a percentage of total demand and time liabilities which bank have to maintain with themselves. Again, it's with themselves and in the form of special liquid assets. So फिर अभी liquid assets, it can be cash, G-Secs and gold, so that like they are in a good commanding position in terms of their balance sheets, and also it prevents banks from lending all of its deposit and also being in a too risky position, so that like I mean their overall health, their overall financial health is protected. Also these assets must not be placed against any loans, and gold is generally kept at a historic price. अब ऐसे नहीं है कि भैया 2 लाख रुपए का प्राइस अभी चल रहा है, तो फिर मैंने जब गोल्ड SLR रखा था तो फिर वो 60,000 रुपए से चल रहा है, तो फिर अब मैं क्या 1/3 ऑफ द गोल्ड बेच दूं क्या? अभी वैसे नहीं रहता, एक डेट फिक्स करते हैं, उस पे गोल्ड का प्राइस करते हैं, फिर उस हिसाब से वॉल्यूम ऑफ गोल्ड फिक्स करना पड़ता है। अगेन SLR का अभी कोई लिमिट नहीं है, अभी इट it can be between like 0 to 40, and then the any ceiling for it has been like done away. Also uh, the SLR is often like kept with themselves in the form of cash, gold, and government, and when the value is calculated, some total of all of it is calculated. The main objective is to maintain that banks are liquid, uh, to compel banks to lend to the government. Why? Because like with SLR, they can keep GSEX as their security, GSEX as a part of their SLR requirement. So to have a SLR mandate for them, they can actually like buy the securities of the government, and also it ensures that like there is a secondary market for the government securities. क्योंकि बहुत बारी क्या रहता है कि if let's say there is a bank A which has SLR requirement of 19%, then there is bank B जिसके पास में भी सेम मतलब 19% का या फिर 20% 20% का SLR रिक्वायरमेंट है। अब क्या हुआ कि इस बैंक ने अब आज के लिए तो लेंड कर दिया, तो फिर अब उस इसके कमेंसुरेट उसकी जो नेट डिमांड है, या फिर इसके पास में डिपॉजिट्स है लेट्स से, और वो लेंड करना चाहता है, तो फिर अब ये डिपॉजिट्स के अकॉर्डिंग उसको अब कुछ SLR रखना पड़ेगा। तो ये जो SLR रखता है, तो फिर अब इमीडिएटली वो कहां से गोल्ड लाएगा, फिर इमीडिएटली कहां से कैश करेगा, क्योंकि उसको लेंडिंग भी करनी है। तो फिर व्हाट इट डज, बैंक बी के पास में एक्सेस ऑफ गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज है, तो ए बी के पास में जाता है, एक्सेस ऑफ गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज बैंक से खरीदता है और अपनी SLR रिक्वायरमेंट पूरी करता है। तो दिस इज वन ऑफ द वे, लाइक CRR makes CRR were more of these stringent measures, but SLR में other factors भी है कि जैसे कि liquidity maintain करना, secondary bond market बनाना, and most importantly credit control करना। कैसे? With increase in SLR, credit creation capacity of the banks would be decreasing, money supply would be decreasing, price levels decreasing, and economic growth also would be decreasing. Why? Because there would be lower credit creation. अब तुम बैंक्स की ही GSEX खरीदने के लिए जाओगे तो फिर अगेन वो मॉरल हजार्ड बनेगा ना। तो इस चीज की वजह से इकोनॉमिक हायर SLR इज नॉट गुड फॉर एनीवन। It only is should be maintained to the level that the safety, the security, the financial capacity of the banks are in a healthy and good levels. एंड अब कैसे SLR बढ़ाने से क्रेडिट क्रिएशन कम होता है, वो SLR वो CRR वाले फंडे की तरह ही है कि 15% रखना है 100 में से, तो फिर पहले 85 रुपीज लेंड कर सकता था, पर अब देखो CRR 15% से लेकर के 20% बना दिया, तो फिर अब वो 80 रुपीज ही लेंड कर पाएगा, तो फिर अब क्रेडिट क्रिएशन भी कम होगा, फिर मनी मल्टीप्लायर भी कम होगा, एग्रीगेट डिमांड भी कम होगी। I hope like this is you are able to understand this. And again same thing कि बैंक की प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी कम रहेगी, क्योंकि उसको या तो गोल्ड में रखना पड़ेगा, या तो फिर उसको कैश में रखना पड़ेगा, या तो फिर उसको गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज में रखना पड़ेगा। जीसेक जो रहती है वो 6-7% की यील्ड देती है, और अगर वो तुम्हें और मुझे व्हीकल लोन देगा, तुम्हें और मेरे को हाउस लोन देगा, तो फिर 9% 9.5% से रहेगा, तो फिर 2% का जो स्प्रेड मिस आउट होता है उससे प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी भी कम होती है। बट इसका इंपैक्ट कम रहता है CRR के मुकाबले, क्योंकि SLR कुछ तो इनकम अर्न करती है फ्रॉम द गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज, बट CRR के केस में देयर इज नो सच इनकम फ्रॉम द रिजर्व्स व्हिच आर केप्ट in addition to the CRR and SLR, which are like the variable reserve ratios, there are certain typical processes called as open market operations by RBI. So what it is, these are the operations whereby central government, which is like the central bank, which is the RBI, buys and sell government securities in the financial markets to influence the money supply and overall like the aggregate demand in the economy. So it is generally done through the auctions, and how it functions is very simple. Like if RBI, there is this RBI, and then like there is this institution. If RBI, let's say, buys the securities from them, RBI actually gives them the money, and with that money, the institutions can actually create credit. They increase the money supply, they increase the demand, and so on. So when there is a sluggish growth, when there is a lower growth, when there's a lower demand, generally what does RBI do is RBI buys the securities from the market to increase the money supply. On the contrary, when there is a higher inflation, RBI wants to reduce the money supply in the economy, so thus RBI sells them the government securities to suck out the money supply and overall liquidity in the market. And it is generally done through the auction. How it is done? If, let's say, RBI wants to sell a bond of, let's say, 100 rupees face value, then what does RBI would do? RBI would give in the auction, and in auction, like, different players would actually bid for it, and the highest bidder would get the security, which is of, let's say, 95 rupees, which is the PNB. And that's how it works. So bond price is 95 rupees, and then interest yield would be like 5 uh, interest yield would be the 5%, because it's 100 के ऊपर 5 रुपए का yield मिल रहा है. And we have discussed about how bond prices impact the interest rate, and how interest rate actually like impact the overall yield. That this thing we have discussed in a great detail. Additional In addition to this, like, there are bank rates as well. It is a rate at which the central bank lends money to the commercial banks against the approved securities, and generally it has been given as like the repo rate plus like some 25 to 100 bps, like basis point above the repo rate. And we'll be discussing about what the repo rate is and what it is. But like, bank rate is this rate uh, uh, at which banks actually can borrow money from the RBI, and by varying the bank rate, RBI controls the credit. So if, let's say, RBI offer discount rate at higher rate, which is the increase whereby, like, the increase the bank rate, the bank's profit may be affected. So it will not approach RBI for the discounting, or will charge higher discount rate from the customer from the lending that they do. So if, let's say, like, this is bank and they want to raise funds, so what they will do, they will either borrow from the RBI, or like they will borrow from the uh, people or other households. So if, let's say, they borrow from RBI at 5%, then they can give that 5% borrowed funds at a 7% to have 2% of spread. However, if, let's say, they borrow from RBI at 6%, then the 1% spread would be left for them. So their profitability actually decreases. So what happens? Either they would have to increase the lending rate. So increasing lending rate makes borrowing costlier. So this reduces the demand, reduces the overall credit generation, and overall controls the overall the money supply in the economy. So in that case, the customer may not discount the bill, or customer may not take the credit. So depending upon the economic condition, depending upon what macroeconomic policy measures are, depending upon whatever inflation rates are, RBI alters the bank rates. So in case of like higher inflation, RBI prefers to have the higher inflation rate to reduce the lending capacity, to reduce the credit creation. So the bank rate increases, borrowing from the RBI becomes costly, money supply decreases. Similar is the case with bank rate decreases, borrowing becomes cheaper, and money supply increases. However, in current days, this bank rate has become quite the old phenomenon, and we don't have them at the present date. And like I have discussed earlier, so here itself, whereby the bank rates are rate at which RBI discounts the first class bills of exchange. So let me tell you, like, what do I mean by when I say, like, these are the first class securities? These are corporate securities against which banks can borrow from RBI. Generally, they are commercial paper, commercial bills, and they are issued at a discount. So what do they mean at a discount? person uh, doesn't earn interest, rather they are like they have coupon zero interest coupon. So you don't get interest, rather you are issued at a discount. So what will happen? Let's say you have a commercial paper, or you have a like bill of exchange which would mature at 31st of March, and it is of the 100 face value. And now if let's say you want to convert it to the money right now, today, like on the 10th of March, then you would have to get 95 rupees of that 100 rupees. So that 5% is the discount, and the processes of the discounting. And this actually like works in across the this commercial papers, commercial bills, then T bills also. When we'll discuss about the fiscal policy and government debts, they are zero interest or zero coupon securities. So example would be like, so TCS, let's say, issues commercial papers of 5 lakh rupees, and they are for a 1 year. Bank buys them at a discount. So since they will mature and they will be of the value of 5 lakh rupees at the end of 1 year, but at this position they'll only have to pay 4.5 lakh rupees. This is called as discounting. Later banks can actually sell it to the RBI for, let's say, lesser discount. So they may sell to RBI at 4.7 lakh rupees, and RBI pays out like the 5 lakh rupees minus the discount and the interest. This is called as rediscounting. So first commercial papers were discounted at the RBI, then again at the bank, and then banks are again, they are again discounted at the RBI. अबे जितनी बारी होता है उतनी बारी rediscounting होती है. So if bank rates increases, money supply decreases. Why? Because rate of discounting increases. Rate of discounting increases. How what do I mean by rate of discounting increases? If let's say this 100 rupees face value bond is there, and now it's being like discounted to 95 rupees, then 5% is the rate of discount. So 95 rupees will be the money supply with the bearer of these bills of exchange. But let's take a case whereby we increase this discounting rate to 8%. So this 100 rupee bond would be, rather than 92, it would be 95. It would be given to the 92. So now rather than 95 rupees of money creation, only 92 rupees of money creation, trade creation would be there. And thus the 3 rupee difference in the money supply is there. So and 3 rupees reduce money supply in this case. So that's why increasing back rate is to reduce money supply. Then there is something called as a liquidity adjustment facility. So what happens under a LAF, central bank tries to reduce the short-term fluctuations in the currency through operations called as repo and reverse repo transactions. So these are like very important and very significant aspects of any economic system. So what are repos? Repos are they are called as repurchase options, and then there is a repo rate. So first understand what repo is, what are repurchase options or operations. So repo is a process whereby central banks actually purchase short-term government securities from financial or institutions or banks with an agreement that they will buy them at a predetermined rate or date. They will buy them back at a predetermined rate. So every repurchase operation has two legs. In first leg, what RBI would do, RBI would, from the bank or from the financial institution, they will buy certain securities and infuse the cash to them. And in second operation, in second leg, there is a commitment or obligation, or let's say like the agreement or option. Option means not necessarily they will have to buy it, but they may or they may not buy it, to actually like buy them back. So RBI, and then there is this bank, and then they would give them the security which was earlier there. So that is how the repurchase operation happens in. However, repo rate is a rate at which the commercial banks borrow from the RBI, and this has been the major policy rate and major segment rate that has been existing. And generally what happens, they are given in against the mortgage securities, and they are generally of the short term. What do I mean by like short term? They are generally done for the 1 day or overnight basis. So they are like done for the 1 day, there are for the 14 days, and they are generally variable rate repos. So what do I mean by variable rate? The rate at which discounting is done, or the rate at which the interest is actually like paid, is variable and depends upon the auction I have talked about. In addition to this, in recent times, innovative measures like the fixed rate repos have been put in by the RBI, and there are long term repo rates, targeted long term repo rates, and special LTRO, special long term repo rates. So what happens? So the long term repo rates uh, uh, are generally for 1 to 3 years, and though interest rate is somewhat similar to the repo rate, but the rationale behind it is injection of long term liquidity compared to what the short term liquidity which is being induced by the short term funds. This came into fore particularly in the case of demonetization, whereby there was large amount of deposits which were put in with the banks, and they needed to have some respite from the increased deposits and lower lending space that they had. Uh, so repo rate is a rate at which rate of interest at which central banks provide short-term loans to commercial banks against government securities. So if let's say there is this government bank, and then there is this there is RBI, and then there is this there is this commercial bank, and if government wants to have a loan, then they would approach RBI giving G6 as a mortgage, and then they will get money from it. And the interest rate on this transaction would be on the loan received by it would be of the repo rate, which is of the like most significant. And of course, you will be understand that increase in repo transaction, which would mean that there is an increase in money supply. However, repo rate increases means that there is a decrease in money supply. So repo transactions are increase in borrowing from the RBI. So remember, these are transactions. If let's say there's an increase in transactions of repo from the RBI, then central banks would have larger money for the liquidity, larger money for the credit creation, and so on. But the repo rate increase would mean that increase in the rate of interest at which commercial banks borrow from the RBI, and leading to reduced money supply. Uh, Additionally, like the bank rates generally, they are for the long term lending, and they are approved against the securities, and they are generally like the higher than the repo rate. So generally, like repo plus 25 to 100 bps would be the bank rate. However, repo rates are for the short term lending, they are for the government securities, and they are generally lower. Why? Because they are generally for the shorter time. So that's why the interest rates on them are also lower. So in India, repo rate is actually the policy rate, and RBI mainly signals monetary policy through these interest rate. Uh, Additionally, like there are long term repo operations, whereby like there is they are done by long term repo operations. So they are generally done for 1 to 3 years of lending, and then they are done at a repo rate, and the main purpose is to like uh, inject long term liquidity. And so these special LTROs are actually like for the small financial bank, to ensure that like their mandate of 75% of the SLR is maintained in, and in that context this repo works in. uh, then similar to repo, there is something called as reverse repo, whereby the central banks sell short-term government securities to central financial to financial institutions or the banks, with the agreement or with the option to repurchase them back at the predetermined rate at a future date. So it is a rate of interest similar to that. It is a rate of interest at which the banks can keep their funds with the central banks for a short period of time under the reverse repo transaction. So what happens? Uh, like in the case of repo, there is this central bank which is RBI, and then there is this commercial bank, and RBI from commercial bank would be getting the lending. So RBI would be lending to commercial bank in case of repo. However, reverse of this happens in the case of reverse repo, where RBI and there is this commercial bank. Commercial banks keep their deposits with the RBI, and so even when the reverse repo rate increases, the money supply decreases. How does that happen? So what would banks do? Banks would prefer to keep their funds with RBI. Why? Because it's absolutely of the guilt edged. It's absolutely safe. There is a no risk of credit failure. There is a no risk of liquidity failure or anything. Banks would be getting periodic interest at the specific times, and then it's absolutely of zero of any risk. So what they would do with increase in repo rate, their motive to keep their funds with RBI increases. So their motive to lend to others decreases, and this actually impacts greatly to the overall credit supply. So even with increase in repo rates, also money supply decreases. So not only when the repo increases, money supply decreases. Even when the reverse repo increases, money supply decreases. Why? Because it is the rate at which banks keep their funds with the RBI for the shorter term, and when reverse repo increases, the propensity or the motivation for the banks to lend to others than RBI decreases. Why? Because they feel that RBI is the safest bet among all. It's gilt edge, so they would prefer to keep their funds with the RBI rather than lending them to the others and indulge into create credit creation, and this actually reduces the overall money supply. Then additionally, there is something called as marginal standing facility. You can call it as a part of repo operation, as a part of repo. However, its special feature is that under MSF, RBI lends money up to certain percentage of NDTL on an overnight basis. So generally it's for the overnight basis, and it's up to maximum of 2% of net demand and time liabilities. And generally it is interest rate charged on the MSF is greater than the repo rate by the 25 to 100 percentage. And marginal standing facility is generally done uh, against the mortgage of eligible securities, which can be like the state development loans, and they are generally done in the multiples of 1 crore, and it's actually done to adjust for the overnight liquidity crunches, overnight uh, uh, demand for the liquidity, and ensure that operations beyond repo are required. Additionally, there is another scheme which is called as market stabilization scheme, and under this scheme, RBI sells special type of government securities to suck out liquidity created to the forex influx. So to discuss you up a bit, to discuss with you up a bit, market stabilization scheme comes in factor when there is a large forex influx. So what will happen when there is a large forex influx? There would be rupee appreciation. Why? Because the demand for rupee would increase, and demand for forex would decrease because the forex influx is greatly there, and then this rupee would be appreciated. So to actually address this rupee appreciation, what government would try and do, government would actually inject rupee in the market, so that the exports are protected. What happens with the appreciation of rupees? Exports become cost costlier and imports become cheaper. So people may try and go for the cheaper imports to protect domestic financial stability, to protect domestic uh, uh, economy. Rupee is injected in it. However, this injected rupee may lead to potential inflation if the demand is not suitably met. To have a contingency measure for this increased potential inflation, market stabilization scheme is done, whereby they suck out the additional liquidity injected by the forex influx and the rupee appreciation which was driven by it. I hope like this concept is clear for you. How does like it goes from one thing to the other thing. If you have any doubt with respect to, you can like get back to me. But फिर से एक बार मैं बताता हूँ, किसी केस में अगर जैसे फॉरेक्स इन्फ्लक्स होता है तो फिर उससे रुपी अप्रिसिएशन होता है। क्यों? क्योंकि रुपी की डिमांड बढ़ती है और डॉलर की डिमांड या फिर फॉरेक्स की डिमांड कम होती है, तो फिर रुपी अप्रिसिएशन होगा। अब रुपी अप्रिसिएशन होता है तो फिर उसको एड्रेस करने के लिए, क्यों? क्योंकि रुपी एड्रेस होने से एक्सपोर्ट कम होते हैं, इंपोर्ट चीपर बढ़ते हैं, तो उनको प्रोटेक्ट करने के लिए रुपी इंजेक्ट किया जाता है। अब इस इंजेक्टेड रुपी की वजह से इन्फ्लेशन ना हो, इसलिए मार्केट स्टेबलाइजेशन स्कीम आती है, which is talked about here. RBI has to pay interest to money under and to create liquidity due to forex influx. Apart from that, there are certain qualitative or selective measures in which there is a discrimination and there is a distinction between various sectors of the economy to which the impetus is given for the credit creation or for the lending. One is credit rationing, so which is a sector specific. So what does central bank fixes a quota for different sectors? So they mean that like agriculture को 5% of total क्रेडिट एक्सपोजर आपको देना ही पड़ेगा, एमएसएमई को आपको 7% देना ही पड़ेगा। अभी जैसे प्रायोरिटी सेक्टर लेंडिंग पॉलिसी है कि जिसमें सर्टेन सेक्टर्स को विच आर लाइक द एग्रीकल्चर, एमएसएमईज, वीकर सेक्टर्स, एजुकेशन, हाउसिंग, फूड प्रोसेसिंग, आपको डोमेस्टिक कमर्शियल बैंक्स मस्ट लेट 40% ऑफ देयर एडजस्टेड नेट बैंकिंग क्रेडिट। अब ये जितना भी क्रेडिट वो दे रहे हैं उसके 40% आपको इन सेक्टर्स को देना ही पड़ेगा। सिमिलर देयर आर सब टारगेट्स ऑल्सो कि एग्रीकल्चर को आपको 18% ऑफ द टोटल देना पड़ेगा, फिर उसी में भी स्मॉल एंड मार्जिनल फार्मर्स को आपको 8% देना पड़ेगा। Also, priority sector lending targets mainly targeted sectors which normally do not receive adequate credit from the bank. So it's government and RBI policy to actually ensure that कि उन डेवलपमेंट बेस्ड सेक्टर, सोशल जस्टिस बेस्ड सेक्टर्स को ज्यादा से ज्यादा क्रेडिट मिले, ज्यादा से ज्यादा बेनिफिट हो। एंड बहुत बारी ऐसे होता है कि इवन दो दीज मैंडेट are there by the RBI to have exposure of their adjusted net bank credit, मतलब जितना भी क्रेडिट वो दे रहे हैं उसका 40% आप डोमेस्टिक कमर्शियल बैंक को, इन प्राइवेट सेक्टर को देना है, उसके बाद भी वो दे नहीं पाते हैं तो दे विल हैव टू बोरो बाय प्रायोरिटी सेक्टर लेंडिंग सर्टिफिकेट्स लॉन्च्ड बाय RBI. So what happens, like these are the certificates, they are issued by banks to the extent of their lending to private sector lending over and above their sector. So if let's say there is a bank and which actually gave the private sector lending greater than their quota, so they would be, for the additional credit that they have given, they will get the private sector lending certificates and they can now sell these certificates to other banks so to ensure that their targets are met. So this actually created excellent scheme by RBI, and so you can say that like SBI के पास में 100% 100 रुपीज का उसने लोन दिया और प्राइवेट सेक्टर कोटा उसके लिए 40 का है, उसने एक्चुअल में प्राइवेट सेक्टर लेंडिंग करी 42 रुपीज की, तो अब उसके पास में 2 रुपए एडिशनल के प्राइवेट सेक्टर लेंडिंग सर्टिफिकेट्स है। अब यस बैंक ने क्या करा कि उसके पास भी 100 रुपीज ने लोन दिए, उसके पास 40 रुपीज का कोटा है, पर उसने एक्चुअल में 20 में ही दिए, क्योंकि भाई वो अर्बन एरियाज में काम करता है, उसके पास में एक्सपोजर नहीं है, उसको नहीं पता कि कैसे देना है, मतलब जो भी रीजन थे। अब बात क्या हो गई कि उसको अब ये 20 रुपए के प्राइवेट सेक्टर लेंडिंग सर्टिफिकेट लेने पड़ेंगे टू एक्चुअली लाइक एंश्योर दैट कि उसका कोटा मेट हो। फिर उसी के बाद में नेक्स्ट रहता है क्वालिटेटिव मेजर, वो है मार्जिन रिक्वायरमेंट। सो बहुत बारी आरबीआई क्या बोलेगी कि आपको 100 रुपीज का लोन एक्सपोजर सर्टेन सेगमेंट के लिए देना है, तो फिर आपको उसके लिए उससे ज्यादा कोलैटरल रखना पड़ेगा। सो एक 20% का मार्जिन रिक्वायरमेंट है। सो इफ लेट्स से समवन इज सेटिंग अप सिगरेट प्लांट, तो आरबीआई डजंट वांट more and more cigarette plants. So what they would do is they would set up to rupees 20,000 ka margin requirement for them. So if let's say a bank A, what they do is they actually try to lend it to the let's say a ITC, and which wants to set up a cigarette plant. So if let's say they want to actually like give loan to them of rupees 1 lakh rupees, then according to the RBI there is a margin for it, there's a margin requirement for it, that margin is of the 20,000. So they would need to keep the collateral of 1.2 lakh rupees. So what that would do, that would reduce the ITC's efforts to actually generate cigarette plants. Why? Because ITC का देखिए अब कोई और मतलब ABC CDS और कोई सिगरेट प्लांट नहीं लगा है, क्योंकि उसको पता है कि इस सेगमेंट में अगर आपको कुछ काम करना है फिर आपको एडिशनल मार्जिन देनी पड़ती है, आपके लिए क्रेडिट कॉस्टली रहता है, and so that actually reduces the overall investment in this segment. Then next is like the ceiling on credit. So RBI fixes the maximum amount of loan that can be provided by a bank to an particular economic activity. So they would say that if let's say you want to set up a liquor shop, तो इसके लिए आपको मैक्सिमम बस केवल 50,000 रुपए का ही लोन मिलेगा, बाकी का अगर आपको जो लोन है वो आपको खुद से लेना पड़ेगा. Then there is a differential rate of interest. So central bank prescribe different rates of interest for different sectors. अब जैसे मैं बोलता ही रहता हूँ कि सोलर प्लांट लगाना है या फिर विंड प्लांट बनाना है या फिर आपको गोबर गैस प्लांट लगाना है, तो इन सब केस के लिए आपको चीपर रेट मिलेंगे. पर वही अगर आपको लेट से सिगरेट प्लांट लगाना है, लिकर प्लांट बनाना है, वाइनरी बनानी है, तो फिर उस केस में आपको हायर रेट पे इंटरेस्ट मिलेगा. तो फिर गवर्नमेंट बाय दैट वे प्रमोट्स द सर्टन सेक्टर बाय नज. Then there are other tools as well. They are like the moral suasion or persuasion. Using this method, central bank advises commercial banks to follow certain policies regarding lending and credit. तो फिर अब वो RBI सेंट्रल बैंक्स को एडवाइजरीज देगा, नोटिफिकेशंस देगा, नोटिसेस देगा, मतलब जो भी डॉक्यूमेंट्स प्रोवाइड करेगा, और या फिर इनफॉर्मली RBI उनको बताएगा कि वी नीड टू प्रमोट दी women entrepreneurs. So that acts as a nudge, as a persuasion, as a moral suasion to the banks to give more and cheaper loans to women entrepreneurs. Then there's a direct action. Direct action में क्या है कि बैंक्स गाइडलाइंस नहीं देती, RBI स्ट्रिक्ट एक्शन देता है. अब वो क्या बोलेगा कि इफ यू डोंट डू दिस then I will impose penalty on you. I'll say like you will be penalized 5 lakh rupees. If you don't do it, I'll deny you दी क्रेडिट फैसिलिटीज. मैं तुम्हारे साथ में रेपो ही नहीं करूंगा, मैं तुम्हें डिस्काउंटिंग का पार्ट ही नहीं बनने दूंगा. तो फिर विथ ऑल ऑफ दिस RBI कंट्रोल्स द ओवरऑल क्रेडिट. सो दिस वे वी हैव एक्चुअली लाइक कवर्ड द एंटायर मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स. इसके बाद भी अगर कुछ डिटेल्स बचेगा तो फिर आई विल गिव देम एज अ हैंडआउट. I hope the mechanism through which the monetary policy transmission takes place, I hope like you are now comfortable with all the monetary policy instruments, they are functioning, they are working and so on. Please, this is very central area. Understand how does like transmission takes place, how does money supply actually working, because इससे दो क्वेश्चन तो पक्का आते हैं, and these concepts are actually interlinked to the banking, which will be our next topic. These are linked with the fiscal policy, these are linked with the foreign exchange and external sector. तो इसीलिए I complete this sector first, but the entire concept must be very crystal clear to you. I hope like this is helping you a lot. If you have any questions, any doubts, you can of course, and you should like get back to me. Till then, study well, keep revising, keep understanding, be obsessed with the studies that you are doing, and of course and always like I say, Jai Hind from my side.